조그들이 소속의 니상시에 다시 들려줘요. 쇼케들이
Dashidele to all the Sangha joining us on the live stream from all over the world. Good morning.
We'll begin with opening prayers in the Yellow Prayer Book on page 1. All Mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience, may they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. All Mother sentient beings, limitless as space, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be free from suffering, and swiftly may they attain precious, unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment. For that purpose, until I attain Buddhahood, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. Until death, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. From today until this time tomorrow, I will apply my body, speech, and mind to virtue. Mandala offering on page 7. An infinite array of worlds, each with 4 continents and the wealth of infinite oceans of realms, if I bring them all to mind and offer them without exception, please hold with compassion all the beings they contain. My body, enjoyments, and whatever I own, my aggregates, elements, and sense sources, my aspirations now and in times to come, as well as everything I grasp as mine. By offering them all, may I be blessed with the end of self-grasping, completely liberated from the bounds of real and unreal, transcending the names and concepts of arising, cessation, and abiding, coming and going, affirmation and denial. The supreme mandala is the natural state. By offering it, may I be blessed to attain the state of Buddhahood.
Om Guru Deva Jagannathanda Jala Padit
Page 10.
Loya Zara Jadava Ye Chong Tu Monte Boye Chu Jian Ko Lo Ko Du Su.
Please turn the wheel of the Dharma of the greater and lesser vehicles and the teachings common to both according to the dispositions and mental
因念过皈依
capacity.
发心跟供曼达的，现在是清转法轮，一切众生之智慧，根据不同而见之，供养不共大小乘，其请殷勤转法轮。
先跟咱们用这些跟对来样上都去交接来了，爸爸没来去也跟爸爸说不叫我中，根据了嘛那么做完的，我们去年就不容易，他这个情况，然后就刚刚上从这波稍微了没叫了说的，这什么东西就这出进去。你要说没帮就把接了，说身体中的你是大气呢，咱把出进的这里大学啦，这里那人啦，东根啦哩，这里少大微信啦，出版不微信啦。印度他是德国小国人啦，德国小国了的呢，这当，那的呢，忙不吃什么的呢？用个电把一个线呢，你工作就这是吧？没办法，你当帮你说了，这记着你的呢，长期这种这里这从这里的看有嘛的，然后这里你那个大我马桶呢？남자들이 받아들인 다시 인상적인 거래 제들이 근데 문제 소방이 봐 송시에들이 이 동당 많이 제들이 문제도 있어요. 애들이 저번에 명인 수방고 들 강연체 사진은 살로기는 요래 얘도 차도 다 삼로동 하정 삼로동 가서 그 친구들 들이 내가 강의들이 다들은 축구 늘네 축구 눈이 심리 남다라 다지 인항상이 타제에서 이 추탄기 이 제가 나와서 저는 셈서 나라니 소리만 som바 이 책을 남주기나 어쨌든 동상과 대마 참아지니 산지의 주복지에서 뛰는 데고요 이 책을 지고해 나라니 소리만 참아 요래 내가 대시를 구슬한테 때려서 막한테 라리 소리만 되는데 난 똑똑똑 지금 이제는 좀 내치는 데에 저거 재미 나다데 나와 샘트 타게 재미도 뭐 타게서 지전에 동당을 대바테 하고서 내가 동당을 대바서 뒤까지 되니 이메 받으리 좀데 이요 말이지 네 그다 주고 과정은 나서 산지산나 대니 남의 매에서 산지산을 대만이요 말해서 seksongsare pena teta de to damso ni kontam karita daji ni nang zangi tade de de tangbo daji ni tela de zangi ni ta chewa de ta ko daji ni mune de yana ni kodeni chewa kodeni 정말 daji ni 이 초와 대독니 이 하장 차서 대독니 되는 거래. 차당 니가 냠도 동나. 차당 못 당겨. 이제 당을 때려 당마. 드니 더터 중제 그거네. 예를 말해 봐지. 예를 들면 더터 니 봐지 가래. 날 차. 니 선바데 이제 당 차당이야 저 차당 몽좀 됐으나 진짜 호라더니 정말이. 그래 제일 장이 차대게 차당 처벌도 받더니 받지. 차당 이제 레소네 들들이 배단 자부 용진 상시야 차단이던 대소는 들다 중문적으로 세가기와 세가무기와 차도에 배대 잡아는 배들이 들더니 니진 처벌하는 데는 너는 철도되는 무보단 치마를 줘봐서 사진 좀 되게 너지 줘봐서 소문에 치마를 줘봐서 치마를 줘봐야 되는데 생을 초과들 어쨌지 새로 초과를 내고 다시 박차고 그래 제가 다 되게 대고 왕하더니 새로 초과도 야도 다 박차당 못해 야들이 들이 새로 박차도 많이 랭거래 就是차왔더니 따뜻하 다 문제디 근데 낙도지고 그래서 또 봤으면 지시는 이런 것들 차 잘라들 자동지 제도 봐지 이 다들 오주 zambu지 뭐시나 될 가람세 들때서 이들은 될 마다와한테 들때 속다처럼 다 소화 도용 저거지 초고 오다 대리 아담 철시라 들때 소화 레바지 소화를 받은 초반에만 마시래. 어때도 예당 인지 맞지. 말은 되고요. 나한테 도망가기 잡다실. 나를 인지 문제 조라서로서 나 이동하지 고요. 그래서 일치고 차더래. 들이 이도 마음을 다 나만 인지 가래. 들이 때라디 제만하리 배송에 송소를 지선 장리 차당을 안 가서 주가 나오는 독성. 지송 소리 지선 장리 들이 레사 당신을 받자죠. 이 말들이 말을 해서 들으서 말들이 좋은 다 사들 이 차단들하고 송송전에 별을 몇개로 따고 이제도 뭐 어떤 게 들이 책임 받으라. 들이 바로 봐보자. 들이 양양 된 인수는 들이 잘자. 들이 잘이 차단제. 들이 저거들이 들이 거기에 담겨져. 계속 쏘게 요를 다 때라서 봐. 다서 치고는 약합 봤다. 차단 치고 쏘고를 배 잡을게 약합에 차단기 하자 독수지 뭐또 약합들 몇번 가서 뒤 코르들이 차단기 좋고요. 뒤 촉치 뭐 뒤쪽 받고 자 들이 일단 잡을래 딱 저거 안 먹어요. 다들 능력 탐색 되게 종류고요. 되게 레사 잡아 되게 다 레디나 밤이만 다다다 나타다 동년자 따와 탐색 레게 될 따따인 거요. 또 레를 송거요. 그래서 차단 철수는 좀 거래도 다 철수는 레사한 것도 없어. 레사를 가려야 돼. 다 레게 미는 것도 없어. 대하고서 초반에 되는 말이 나던 말은 초하고 차당 철파들 또 인지면 다 하고서는 들리나 봐 차탐지 라지 것들이 쳐달라는데 별로 몽동아 라지나 사라사 돌을 별로 쳐라로 먹지 해서 다들 송거를 하고서 선들이 참 너또 막차 같은 게 저를 뭐지 되더니 이서 면에 획득고요. 장소로 다기 얼마에 그 장소 발라는 거에 발락 쳐봤던 줄 알기 획득고요. 배제다 그랬지. 샘도 장소다고 곰 나빠다고 곰서 나빠도 됐다서 단지 한장 땡서 보더니 공부하시 그런데 다기 항상에 자기의 차장 쳐봤듯이 봐서 너는 천적까지 넣고도 맞춰까지 배려도 능이 먹고는 다 능이 주고 출발해 좀 해. 그렇다고 뭐지 타발고 주고 언제나 또 주전처럼 들리고 속에서 다다다 소말에 배는 대할 때는 추천 천디나 천도르디나 따다다 따다다 이제 다기 인함을 성을 했지. 들기들은 공부하지. 들기들다 나타다 능이 차라 탄치 들이 유머가 노아를 돌아서 봐. 샘물성, 샘물 박살성, 들이 때려 사기야 샘물성, 호화 샘물성, 혼재지가 이자식 대사들이 샘물대로 광주만 해봐서 대 샤롱만 따때려서 따때려 인지 쇼는 되는 초롱나 초록 졌다와지 딱가도 이런 타발 모두고 니 템다 살때 차마디 내리고 또 그래. 그렇게다 지방을 또 나가지 동어도 쳤는데 다 잡아가지고, 니 사마도 양고리에서 놓고, 그 말이지. 철을 좀 가려요. 막 철을 좀 가려요. 철만 철이 제발 가려야지. 철이 들리고, 무거워서 나왔는데, 니속. 내 말들이 띠띠 양들이, 들 때, 당분은, 들리 시기지. 또 나와야 mention, 배치해서. 내가 가져, 또 나와야 mention, 배치해서. 니는 왜 깼었는데, 나와의 문제 신배는 다혼 나와는 저바시고 저바들 신신들이 양대한들 해서 아무요래 들 저바들은 저바데 도트고 들 신지들이 아주 잡고 그러나 들 저바도 이발을 송하래 들 때는데 사실 또 되게 세우다 치마를 쭉 봐서 다들 롱쭉 거리 我们家是这叫还有个让人给吃了的那种，早吃的把这开的打了就行了。我把娘娘到这嘛的，那个头下了我讲你，那个错那个，这人真生气，别人那个下手我，这里第几次呢？我这是错差了用个，年纪是用个的，差了他们这用个嘛的，下手记得了，让人个年纪我这来什么？别人没见过我，那没来啥。要当这上了说没得上我当然，那是没有嘛这玩意，别人我说下面个到老上了没得，那不还好的呢，但肉，下面我老钱没钱了，你没来给家些有的，但没你上面老的没有嘛的有的，哦，他给家写过，他是写过来的。当我那人也上过嘛，马也上过嘛，这找我来查我来，娘们接嘛接嘛，娘们就我你没人，我你人，可能拉送的人还是啥子，人问题，我人这那边伢子嘛，那是吵这个，这种上我当娘的这里的，打工吧的，我把娘当这话送，那这多那个地方这话全部有的，大家好把老师就话送，那我都觉得上边我那。就是老呀，在那吃的呢，那用过有的，马把你送过来。
So today, then, my friends, we continue with the 7 branches of the secret mantra. And so we have already completed talking about prostration and making offerings. And today we come to the confession of negativities. And actually, because this is the 2 truths, there are many people who develop some doubts in this regarding this. And so that is because there seems to be a contradiction between the 2 truths. Because on the one hand, we say on the relative level, karma is infallible, and on the ultimate level, it is all emptiness. So many people have some doubts about that, and we can't blame them for having some doubts about that, because there will be these kind of doubts until one has really seen the true nature of one's mind or the view. And until one has seen it directly, there will be a perception, a dualistic perception of self and other. And so then from that perspective, there is karma that is unfailing. But also even that ultimately is empty of self-nature. There are many stories also from the time of when the Buddha was alive of people who encountered a lot of difficulties on their path when it came to this discrepancy between the relative and the ultimate. So it's that for this reason it's very important to really contemplate that. And so that is then what the next verse introduces us to. And in my text here on page 10, so this is the verse that begins the actual teaching on the ultimate truth. And so it says, all phenomena are primarily and completely pure mind as it is. Within that, whatever confusion, dualistic appearance of oneself and others, distinction of good and bad, hatred and attachment there might be, each and everything I confess, it is purified within that state. So this shows the nature of all phenomena, or as it is said in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, appearances are one's own mind. So here you should remember these words, this verse in the 37 practices at once, because this relates also to the ultimate truth. And it really is, this verse in the 37 practices is really the essence of the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha. Everything is included within it. So this is verse number 22, by the way. And so actually everything is included in the 37 practices, all of the teachings. And so this is also the one teaching that I myself know and that I'm passing on to you. And that is also really all I know how to explain. So in verse number 22, it says, appearances are your own mind. meaning that so first you have to understand that the mind is, appearances are the mind, and then that mind is empty. In this way, in this order, kind of you realize the ultimate truth, which is non-duality. So ultimately, also karma is non-dual. Jigten Somgön had said in the Gongchik, on the level of Buddhahood, there is no division of the twofold truth. So there's no duality. Ultimately, no duality exists. So the Buddha already said that, and then Jigten Somgön said that this is how they describe the ultimate truth. So here, the confusion, whatever confusion or dualistic appearance of oneself and others and so on. So confusion begins with this appearance of oneself and others. So first there's this perception of self and other, and then due to that then appear the labels, the distinctions of good and bad and hatred and attachment and so on. So on the more coarse level, there is the coarse distinction of samsara and nirvana, and then more subtle. So then we have a distinction, we have a division between self and other, and feelings of happiness and suffering, and on a very subtle kind of division is that between hope and fear, which also are thoughts of attachment and aversion. So first, the mind is like water, like completely pure water. And then a particle, a very small particle, pollutes that pure water. And that is ignorance. So that's the first kind of polluting particle. And then the second polluting subtle particle is the attachment to the self. And then the third is the aversion against other. And so due to these three, ignorance, attachment, and aversion, samsara arises. And so this is how the confusion of samsara arises. So whatever this confusion arises from this dualistic perception. And then due to that, we create karmic imprints, habitual patterns. And these karmic imprints in the mind cause us to accumulate karma, driven by attachment and aversion. So because this is sort of the underlying basis, even if we do good things, even if there's a good quality, if that is connected to a mind of attachment or aversion, it will still turn into a fault. Or even if it is virtues, it may just be virtues, like half virtues and half non-virtues, because we are controlled by dualistic grasping, confusion. So in brief, what this is saying is we must cut through the perception of a true or substantial or concrete reality. The Buddha also said in the Diamond or the Vajrakata Sutra, you have to cut through grasping at outer characteristics. And what is that? This grasping at true characteristics, or these concept structures in the mind, is this feeling that arises in the mind where you think, oh, this is what it is, that's how it is. So this thinking, this is what places an imprint in the mind. And then we are controlled by these imprints. So first a feeling arises, and then due to this feeling, an imprint is created. And so then naturally, these imprints reinforce and they proliferate within the mind, and constantly this thought of an I and me arises. So it begins a very subtle. Sometimes also there's a very subtle thought that arises. For example, when somebody says something nice to you, praises you, just a little bit, says something slightly nice to you, and immediately there is this feeling of liking towards that. Immediately you feel attached, and you think about it. And so that is basically, we call that the thoughts that grasp at or kind of conflate the inner concept and the outer object. And if we interpret whatever we hear in a certain way, basically. And that is a fixating thought. And so then when somebody says something nice, immediately we listen and we are very happy about it. But then the moment somebody says something slightly unpleasant, or the moment we encounter any of the 6 sense objects, form, sound, smell, and so on, that is slightly unpleasant, then we reject that. We dislike it. So when we like something, you think that I want that feeling. I want to encounter this object, any object of the 6 senses. And then, now first you identify it and you think that this is it, this is this feeling that you want. And so when you have some mindfulness, then the moment this feeling arises, you recognize this is attachment, this is clinging. Now I'm being deluded. But for the most part, the problem is not the feeling, but the problem is that people don't recognize that feeling. They don't recognize that they are actually deluded, and they just justify the feeling arising. They feel that, of course, this is how it is. Of course, I need to feel that way. Of course, I need this. So the feeling is backed up by the self, the me. Of course, the me, I need this. I need any form, sound, smell, touch, and so on. Any of the 6 sense objects. And I need anything that is pleasant, anything I want, and I do not want anything that is unpleasant. So Milarepa also said that a practitioner who follows is carried away by the ordinary grasping to attachment and aversion to the outer objects is always miserable. Because now we follow our karmic imprints. So there's this feeling that arises. Again, the feeling places a karmic imprint in the mind. It forms a karmic imprint. And then that imprint is like a habitual pattern that causes us to act out, like we say something. And in this way, we accumulate karma. And on the course level, these feelings arise as attachment and aversion. But also they arise on a very subtle level. So first, for example, imagine there is a person who says something unpleasant to you, who insults you. So first, it's a very subtle thought. First of all, you think that it's a real person, and then the person says something that displeases you, and you don't like that. So then there's this subtle grasping of dislike in your mind. And then you keep thinking about it, so you're holding on to that grasping thought, and eventually that person will appear like an enemy. You start to hate that person. And this is really how in samsara we create this division between enemy and friends. And then even we go and kill others, for example. And this happens between countries too in the world. And that's actually the worst kind of attachment and aversion if it happens on a large scale between countries in the world. For example, there's wars and there are like terrorist attacks and so on. And actually when a country is doing things like that, it affects the entire population negatively. And that's why it's so detrimental when countries on a larger scale engage in such activities. And actually, all the suffering of the people in a country really comes from the negative actions of the country on a larger scale. So in any case, all of this comes from karma. And nowadays, for example, all the suffering and the illness, the disease that we experience in the world, it all really comes from such karma. So mainly it is said that all arises from karma. And so here we should reflect, what is the fault? Why is our controlled by attachment and aversion? What's the fault of delusion or confusion? The fault is that if the mind is deluded, we will accumulate karma. And what happens when we accumulate karma? Karma will ripen. So that is something we need to understand. So in the tantric 7 branches, so this is how we need to understand it from the perspective of the view, how grasping arises, these thoughts of attachment and aversion. So mainly it all begins, first of all, with a dualistic perception of self and other. So there's this imprint, this habitual seeing things in a dualistic way. And from this, just naturally, all thoughts our fixating thoughts arise. As somebody who has understood the view or the nature of the mind will see all of these thoughts arising just like waves arising on water. The 5 poisons arise, but they are self-liberated upon arising. Just like drawing like an image on water. As you draw it, it already disappears. So it disappears on its own when you recognize the view. So first, there's a thought, a subtle thought that arises. And when you recognize that thought, you see that the thought is inseparable from the mind, just like the wave is inseparable from the ocean water. And that recognition will naturally cause that thought to dissipate, like a wave dissipating. So that is how we should understand the grasping in our mind. So actually, when you read this verse here, you really have to think about it deeply. It has a very profound thing to understand, a point to understand here. This line, this confusion and dualistic appearance of self, oneself and others, and distinctions of good and bad, and so on. So in brief, what you need to reflect upon here is what are the shortcomings, the faults of grasping, and what is the benefit of not grasping. If you do not want to suffer, basically, then you should not grasp. And grasping leads to confusion or delusion. Gampopa said in the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, he explained how confusion comes about, like the stages of how we become confused like that. So he begins his teachings with that actually. And then also tells us the manner in which we become liberated from them. So how we become confused, it begins with the dualistic perception of self and other. So that is what you need to keep in mind. And this is where all the suffering, all the sickness arises from. The suffering of the 6 realms of samsara arise from the afflictive emotions which arise from the dualistic perception of self and other. So this is really the essence to be understood. Even if you were to read the entire scripture, the entire book, this is really what it is about. It is about this fundamental grasping at a mind that is actually non-dual. As it is said, samsara and nirvana have a single basis. The actual nature of the mind is stainless. And the Jewel Ornament of Liberation explains how from this stainless state we come to such a confused state. So first what arises is a dualistic perception, and then from that arises the confused, distorted perception of self and other. So that is the most important point, even if you don't read the entire book. So we need to understand in brief what is the benefit of not being confused or grasped, and what is the fault of confusion. When you're confused, then you grasp at a true concrete reality of appearances, the true existence of what appears. So it begins with grasping, and grasping leads to clinging. There's this quote by Tilopa that says, "Son, it's not the appearances that tie you down, it is your grasping at them." Actually, some people say, "Son, it is not the appearances that tie you down, but it's the clinging to them." But actually, there's a slight difference between grasping and clinging, and it really actually first begins with grasping and not clinging. So first there is an appearance, and you grasp at it, and that grasping leads to clinging. And then this clinging leads to accumulating karma over and over again. And therefore, we need to recognize the grasping first. It really depends on whether or not we can liberate the grasping thought. So grasping thoughts will arise, but the point is to liberate those grasping thoughts so that they do not develop into clinging thoughts. So it all arises from karma that arises from clinging, that arises from grasping. That's why the Buddha said in the Vajrakata Sutra, you have to cut through the the coarse concept structures of appearances. And what that also means, as you mentioned before, is you have to experience it. We have said that your practice must be imbued with actual experience, meaning that if you know how to meditate, then whatever thought or clinging arises in the mind, you will just let it, or grasping arises in the mind, you will just let it be naturally and allow it to dissolve on its own, just like a wave subsiding back into the ocean. So if you know how to meditate, then you will self-liberate these grasping thoughts. So that is the practice that is imbued with experience. So again, first a thought arises about anything. So a thought appears and you recognize, I'm grasping, grasping arises. So the thought is, that's the grasping arises in the mind. And then if you don't recognize it, then the thought appears and then you begin to think about it further and you think, oh, this is how it is. Oh, this is really how it is. You believe in whatever you're thinking. It begins with this very subtle grasping, this belief in the truth of whatever you are thinking. So actually, also what this is to say is that the mere appearance of a thought does not mean that you believe in its reality, that you believe in the truth of this thought. You can have a thought, but then you recognize it. But if you don't, and if you begin to believe, yes, this is true, whatever you're thinking is true, this is how it is, then this is what leads to confusion. For example, and you see another person, and first of all, you think the other person is real. And then you keep thinking this again, and so this person becomes this solid thing, the person. Actually, even that does not inherently exist. For example, those who are reading the Heart Sutra will understand that. The Heart Sutra explains how things do not inherently exist, even though they do appear. So you can see a person, you can interact with them, talk to them, but there is no thought of that's a real person. But there also is no thought of that's not a real person. So you neither think real nor unreal. And so that is the difference between someone who practices and someone who doesn't practice. Someone who doesn't practice will first of all think that that's a real person and he said this to me. And so you believe in it. It's like kind of being a fish being hooked to something. So you become hooked to that. And so in this way, through recognition, you gain experience. So meditation or practice means an actual experience. And so the experience is to recognize the dualistic appearance of self and other, the grasping arising within the mind. Or as it is also explained in the Samantabhadra prayer very profoundly, there's a single ground but two paths into fruitions. And it all arises from unawareness, not recognizing this single ground.
다 차당 출발하지 마치지 봐서 네가 미진이 다른 게 소속들이 득밤을 개월에 코와 토마미 바로 다다 받았어 봐. 득제합성. 이걸 상모도 그 샷바지시잖아. 네 애들이 수그대도
我们今天已经这个密咒七支供养经讲的这个前两个的一个就是礼拜礼敬诸佛，二个是布戒供养、广修供养。那接下来我们今天要开始讲忏悔业障，就是中文版第10页的第3季，万法本始清净之心性，自他二显好坏分别中，所具一切贪爱与迷乱，一一忏悔自处中清净。那么这个是跟二谛，就是世俗谛、胜义谛有关的。一般人这个会有所怀疑，也认为二者有所抵触。那么认为说相对谛来讲，世俗谛来讲是那个就近谛来讲的是空性，然后这个跟这个相对谛的这个外在的个现象呢，是有抵触的，因为外在是讲这个无常吧。但是在真正的这个 见到这个我们真谛之前呢，我们自然会有二元对立、人我之分，然后还会有这个对于法跟法之间彼此有所抵触的这种疑惑产生。那么我们开始讲这个忏悔之也是开始讲述这个究竟谛，在佛子经37颂第22记里面讲到，诸所显现为自性，心性本离系两边，知以不当于二取相不作意是佛子行。那这个佛子经37颂其实是很重要的法教，它是8万世间法门的精要，那么也是一切法教之中我所知道的，然后把它传给你们。所以我们听到这样子的这个讲法的时候，应该我们要马上能够想到这个佛子经37颂讲述究竟谛的这一个修行法。那基通松公祖师在正法以义公记里面也有讲到，佛谛境界二谛无差别，那也就是说没有这个究竟是无二的，没有就是这个暂时跟究竟的，这其实是合一的。那也没有一切这众生的迷惘来自于自他对立的这种迷惘，有这个执着自他的这个分别好坏的差别，喜欢或者是排斥。那在粗的来讲呢，是这轮回涅槃的分别；那在个人的层次来讲，可能是比较维系的自他的分别，或者是苦乐的差别。我们对事情执着的这种希冀，或者是说对事情排拒的这种恐惧心。所以一开始呢有4个步骤，一开始就是水，大家都是水，然后但是渐渐有一些很小的分子来污染了这个水，这就是所谓的无明。那第2个步骤呢，变成就是执我为实，然后有了执我为实，第3个步骤就是执他为实，并会排拒其他人、其他事。所以这样子，接下来就升起的这个轮回，而有迷惘的，都是因为来自这种二元的对立的缘故。所以我们造出的这个业的印记，由这个执着跟排拒的这种心态。所以根本上呢，如果说我们讲到说善行，如果说是它是根基在这种执着或者是说排拒的这种心态的话，它这样子的善行也会有所过患，也可以说是好中有坏，好坏掺杂的。因为都是来自于这种对于二元对立的这种执着，所以这一点呢，我们修行的人呢，佛陀教诫我们应该要斩断，在一个金刚经或者是砍金刚的这个经典呢，一切所有的外相的这个现象本质是空的，那这就是它。那么当我们也想到有这个心中出现一个念头，或看到外相有一个念头印记出来，然后自己想说这个就是的，这个是什么什么什么，这都是一种业的印记的作用，因为我们是在这个时候就被控制了。那从一开始的一种觉受到变成业的印记，然后在内心中就反复思维这个繁殖这种念头，然后到第10个阶段变成我的这概念就出现了。那从这个世间法的角度来讲呢，这种一开始的烦恼是比较细微的，因为别人给我们小小的称赞，然后我们或许会喜欢，或者是说会去执着这种别人的称赞，或者是说去思维它，反复来思维，然后变成了一种念头的这种执着，对于外在的现象跟内在的这个我们的感受呢有所的个执着。那因为我们这个执着的心呢，对于那个别人称赞我们就欢喜，别人这个诋毁我们就不如意等等，那这种5种这个感受，这个就出现了。那这种5种感受负面的感受出现，我们就要排拒它， 就是这样子的一个过程。那如果说我们了知我们自己对这个事情人事有特别的这个感受的话，那我们马上就是要这个知道说这是一种业的印记，然后他如果不去处理不去了知它的话，不去关照它，他可能就继续在我们内心中繁殖，而到后来生出了一个我。所以呢我们一开始的因为我们的念头的执着，对外在现象跟内在的这个觉受的这种执着，别人称赞我们欢喜，别人诽谤我们就不服气，或者是感觉不如意，然后跟我们这个互相连结，就把这些原本是这种空花的这种觉受把它排拒掉了。那就我们要知道的就是说，就是这样子的情绪产生，这个念头产生，如果我们有正念的话，它在升起念头升起的那一刹那就知道是执着问题，我们就可以把它解脱了。那我们要知道问题是不在我们个人的感受觉受，而是在不知道它是我们升起的这种感受，而且并且执着这种感受的这种状态。所以会有一种念头说，我本就应该要如此，需要这些色身相外触法的东西，你给我糖吃我就很开心很高兴等等。这其实都是一种头上安头的一种偏执的行为。那弥勒日巴祖师也曾经讲过说，当一个修行者被外在的境界外在的现象所束缚的时候，他将是会过着非常凄惨的一个修行的这个生活。那从外在这个造作行业到逐渐的累积这个业力，那么我们在维系另外一个例子，维系上来讲的，当别人讲的不好听的事情，一开始是一种念头，然后后来注意到别人是在讲我，然后我不开心，然后继续在想，继续思维，继续在造作，那到后来就变成他讲这个话的人就变成我们的敌人，自己内心就不喜欢他。那又因为这样的过程呢，造作成朋友跟敌人的这个差别。主要是国跟国之间呢，或彼此呢有这种执着，可能会产生出一种矛盾。那在执着这种矛盾，可能会有战争或恐怖主义的出现。国家在这种状态之下，人民自然就会恐惧。所以我们要知道，一国人民的这个痛苦，其实是在人民的自己的本身的痛苦，再把它加成的。那这都是从业而来的。最近有个例子，就是在这个国内有这个疫情比较严重的，然后大家开始恐慌，然后我就跟他们讲，这个一切都是来自于业，不用贪心，不用特别害怕。那我们要了知，既然一切都来自于业，那到底是哪个地方出错？过患在哪里呢？这个过患就是一开始我们的一些幻觉、妄觉念，或者是说迷惘呢，是他们的过错吗？不是吧？是累积的业力让他们成熟。我们要了解这个密咒七支供养，或者是我们应该知道说如何是我们知道说，当我们有这个自他的二元对立的这种印记，这是一种很细的这种概念。那我们的这个执念呢，是一种具有这种正念可见的这个，如果说我们有正念的话，我们就看到自己内心的念头，好像看到海中的波浪一样。我们内在虽然有五毒，但是呢，我们也可以自己寻求解脱。这个就好像我们在把手放在水面上，然后 在水上面写字，它马上就消失了，无影无踪的。事实上应该是这样子，但是因为我们的执着，而把它继续留下来，继续扩大，就变成烦恼的这个来源。所以在这个解脱庄严宝论里面有讲到说，一开始的时候，这个是一个讲到执着的这个过程是怎么样起源的。第一步骤就是自他的二元对立。我们要知道一切苦都是来自于自他的这个对立。假使让我们念这个许多的佛经所讲的也不过是如此这样的一个过程，就是一开始就是外在的显象，第二个就是有一种抓紧的这种感觉，第三个步骤就是从抓紧变成这个执念了，那就牢牢的抓住，然后第四个步骤就是累积这个业报业果了。那如果说我们一开始这个我们要知道第一个成分就是说自他的这种二元对立是一切的苦跟这个乐都来自于自他的这种二元对立的。即使我们有我们如果来念佛经所讲的也差不多是这样子，都是这样子的这个阐述的进一步的阐述吧。我们要知道主要是来这个轻微的支持，那再接下来比较严重比较强烈的个紧紧抓住牢牢不放的这种执念。若巴祖师曾经对他的弟子讲孩子啊，束缚你的并不是外相，而是你自己的执着心。我们也要了解自己是不是有所执着，那如何让自己的执着能够得到解脱。我们一开始都是来自业的这种印记。那么我们在《金刚切经》里面讲到说，我们这种烦恼应该是自根斩断非外相的这种执着，然后以及弥勒日巴祖师也讲说，修行应该结合自己这个生活的这个经验的体验。我们要知道说任何的这种念头都是来自就是自己升起自己消融毁灭破坏灭的。那如果说我们了解到这一点的话，自然就可以得到这个解脱，因为它本身是自解脱自升起的。那么所以开这个过程这个步骤再讲一次，就是一开始呢就是有一些念头的出现，然后有一个第二阶段就是初步比较轻微的这种执着，但是我们要培养正念，所以在那个念头一升起，这种执着一升起的时候，马上就了知知道说我现在正在执着这样的一个即使是很微细的层次的执着，都自己可以了知执着，然后就把它放下，就得到解脱。我们要知道念头并不等同确信是实相的。那如果我们有执着的话，我们就认为它是实际实相的，那就真正的一个迷惘。所以呢我们看到一个人，并且看到这个人以为真实有这样子的人，但是实际上所谓的这个人的外相是没有自信的。我们在心经里面也有提过类似的一个讲法。那我们见一切诸相的作用呢我们也马上了知它不是实相的这个本相，那这非真实的也是非真实的。比如说有人的两个朋友之间吵架了，不愉快了，内心会想着说他这样子来讲我，然后我们当有这种念头产生的时候，我们事实上已经被的这个执着的钩子已经勾住了。所以我们在普贤王如来祈愿文一开始就讲积1到2结果2，这是很深广的这个法教。那个我们要知道说这个根基是来自于我们内心的这二元对立的这个念头，并且加以支持这些念头也好，外为实相的这种执着所引起的。 那我们这个迷惘也跟执着也就是根本来自于我们不了解我们的基本、我们的基地、我们的本质都是同共的，都是从一个地方来的，都是从这个所谓的 single ground 积1到2，结果2的这个积一样，积到果也好，根到果也好，这不只是讲根或者是讲积，都是来自同一源头的，应该有这样子的了解。那如果我们有正念，自然就可以在念头升起对吧，加以照见解脱。如果没有正念的话，升起而执以为实，就继续强化我们的执着了。所以在英文上这个执着的程度有所不同，中文没想到怎么翻译比较好。
So, whatever confusion, dualistic appearance of oneself and other, distinction of good and bad. So at that time when you read this, we are here in the branch of confession, so we bring to mind all of the negativities, all the confusion and so forth that we have developed in our mind. So we bring to mind all the negativity, all the non-virtues, activities that we have accumulated since beginningless time in some and bringing them to mind, here we confess them. But here we also need to understand what it actually is that is to be confessed. So, first of all, it is said, if you wish to know what you did in the past, look at your present body, your present life. So now, if you experience a lot of suffering, recognize that this is the result of negative actions committed in the past, non-virtuous actions. And so it is actually through suffering that we are able to recognize that, this distinction between virtue and non-virtue. If we would not experience any suffering, we wouldn't be able to distinguish between what is virtues and what is non-virtues. But it is through suffering that we recognize, so the cause of happiness is virtue and the cause of suffering is non-virtue. So this is the meaning of confession, confessing negativities. Do you want to be happy? Yes, of course I want to be happy. So if you want to be happy, you have to confess the negativities from within your mind. Because happiness and suffering all arises from your mind. And so there is a relative confession and there's an ultimate confession. On the ultimate level, everything is emptiness. So ultimately, there's no distinction, no division between virtue and non-virtue even. And there is also no one to confess and nothing to be confessed. But on the relative level, when there is a dualistic perception of self and other, there are thoughts of attachment and aversion. And there is not a single karma that is committed which does not arise from these thoughts of attachment or aversion. It is just we develop them to different degrees. So there are the 10 non-virtuous actions, or there are the 5 extremely negative actions with immediate retribution. But in brief, basically all negative conduct comes down to the 10 non-virtues. And this is also why there is much suffering in the world. It all is like a karmic retribution, or like a karmic credit or a debt. So, for example, the experience of short life is the karmic retribution, or like the karmic creditor for having murdered or taken the lives of others, or the retribution of experiencing impoverishment impoverishment is the retribution of having stolen from others and having deceived others and having taken their wealth, or the experience of illness and pain and so forth is the karmic retribution of having abused and injured others. So this is how it is actually explained in the Church practice. But so in brief, all of our suffering comes down to karma accumulated with attachment, aversion, or ignorance, really. Those are the 3 poisons. And the 3 poisons develop into the 5 poisons, and then we also speak about 6 poisons if we if we separate stinginess or greed and attachment. Now there's many people nowadays in the world who practice Vajrakilaya, for example, and that's also explained really well in the Confession of the Vajrakilaya practice. It explains really that what it is that is to be confessed is what is the root or the seed of confession. It is within our own mind. It's not these or the various activities that we have done, but it is what causes us to do them. And that is our afflictive emotions. So there's no need to think about, have I done this or that with the body? What have I done? Now, often people ask the Lama like what kind of negativities they have committed and pure and impure things they have done and what needs to be confessed. So it's not about all the extent of one's various activities one has done, but one has to see who was the one who did it. We need to get at the root of what actually has caused us to engage in these activities. And that always comes back to the mind, our own afflictive emotions. That is what we mainly need to recognize. That is what we need to confess. So the main point is that when the afflictive emotions arise, the way they are confessed is by recognizing the afflictive emotions and recognizing fault as fault. And not recognizing a fault as a fault is what we call ignorance. When you recognize a fault as a fault, then you can let go of any kind of suffering. So there's basically two kinds of suffering in the world. There's some people who suffer, but even though they suffer, there's some kind of relief from their suffering. And then there's others for whom there is no relief. It is said that there is no good quality in negativity, but if negativity had a good quality, then it would be its potential to become completely purified through confession. So there are some who have committed negativity, but they do understand karma, and they trust in karma. So probably nowadays there is not so many in the world who really believe in karma, but nevertheless there is some who trust in karma and who recognize that all negativity comes down to their own afflictive emotions. For example, they've said something and they recognize that was not okay, that was wrong. For example, they have hurt or injured somebody, or somebody lost their life and so on, due to their fault. So then they would say this was a fault, this was not correct, and they would then recite maybe a mani mantra and confess. And so the point of confession is really regret, feeling remorse, knowing that this has hurt somebody and that was not good, that was not okay, so they regret. So when they cause injury or suffering to others, they know that, knowing karma, they would know that my injury, my harming them, my causing suffering to them will ripen back upon me. So they recognize that harming others is actually creating their own suffering. So to recognize this is what we call the confession on the relative level. So here on the relative level, one recognizes who is the one who creates suffering. We get to the root of it, and that is the afflictive emotions, and such a person recognizes that. And so such a person then also recognizes that all the suffering in the 6 realms really comes down to the 6 afflictive emotions. And then if one summarizes the 6 afflictions, they come down to the dualistic grasping to self and other, which is what we call ignorance. So there is a confession on the relative level and on the ultimate level. The confession on the relative level really comes down to immeasurable love and compassion. Confession means laying aside, purifying by laying aside. And on the relative level, negativities are laid aside through immeasurable love. And so how does that happen? For example, first of all, you recognize the afflictive emotion that arises in the mind. So it doesn't mean that there is no affliction ever arising within the mind. But for example, there's a mosquito that is about to bite you. So if you have if you confess negativity with immeasurable love, then on compassion you would think that this is also a living being, that living being is hungry and it's starving and it finds no food to eat. It's just like a human being. They're human beings. When they starve, they even eat other human beings, or animals eat other animals because they are starving, they are hungry. So you apply that to yourself. What kind of affliction is that leads to such an existence? It is the affliction of stinginess or greed, of the 6 afflictive emotions. And then where do you find it? You find it within your own mind. And it is because of that, this feeling of, this sense of starvation and impoverishment, that beings prey upon each other. And that's also why we as humans eat animals. So the reason why we do that is because of this sense of impoverishment. And from this, the various afflictive emotions then arise. And this is the root that needs to be tamed. So whenever you observe anything like that, like an animal and so forth, you should think about what afflictive emotion is related to this kind of existence. And then once you have identified the afflictive emotion, then apply it to your own mind. Take it onto your own mind. Think that I have this afflictive emotion in my own mind. And the afflictive emotions in my own mind and of all beings in the 3 realms is actually one and the same. So therefore, the negativities and the obscurations, the afflictions of all sentient beings in the 3 realms and my own 6 afflictive emotions are one and the same. They are not separate. So this is how we get to the root of this confusion, a dualistic appearance of self and other. That the self, this perception of me, the self of all beings in the 3 realms, and my own self are one and the same. So this is how a bodhisattva first recognizes. So they first recognize that when they observe suffering, the afflictive emotion present in their own minds. So first they recognize, and then they recognize that this affliction in my mind is the affliction of all sentient beings in the 3 realms, is one and the same. And it is the root of all negativity. Now, for example, anger, and all the other afflictive emotions too, but especially anger nowadays is really what causes disasters like the pandemic, for example, that we are experiencing. So who has created it? It is the karma that comes from having murdered or killed others with a mind of anger. And then where is that anger right now? We can find it in our own mind. And actually the way we treat the anger in our own mind is like almost like a friend. We justify our anger. So if you think about it correctly, you think that the root of all this suffering, of all beings in the 3 realms, is anger. And even though people have found the precious human body, they spoil it by getting angry and hateful and so on. Actually, if you think about it, it's extremely hard to find the precious human body. You understand that by reflecting on its causes and numbers and many illustrations. But it's extremely rare to find such a precious human body. And then even within that, even though it is so rare, there's so many, how many really spoil it, completely waste this human existence. And what is the fault of that? Why do they do that? It is because they do not understand karma. So what about a person who does understand karma? So a person who understands karma may engage in negative action, but they recognize the mistake in it, and they regret, and then with regret they confess. And through confession, even though they actually have done something wrong, but because they have confessed it in a previous life, then now in this life, even though some remnants of this karma is ripening, there will be some sort of rescue for them. For example, a medical treatment will work, or some like ceremonies or pujas done for them will work. Basically, one can help them. There will be a condition that can help them and bring them relief. And so then there is some who have not confessed at all. and for them there is no relief. So the difference is the karma that they have accumulated, and the karma is the karma of confession. Those who have confessed in a previous life or regretted, they can, for example, be healed. There's help for them. And then there's others who, no matter how hard they try, nothing can help them. So that is because they have not confessed. And then, for example, nothing can be done. Then, for example, animals prey on each other and eat each other and so forth. So this is why this happens. Because once karma is created, it must ripen. And it will ripen into suffering, but also ultimately we should understand that suffering is actually something beneficial. And why? It is because it purifies our negative karma. And we can purify it also through confession. And how we do that on the relative level, so we recognize that all negativity arises from self-grasping, and as a result we engage in action. Therefore, because it comes back to self-grasping, if you cultivate an altruistic mind, self-grasping naturally diminishes. And so this is this is how bodhisattvas practice. They cultivate bodhicitta, and it has the power to destroy negativity. It is said it is just like fire burning away a pile of dry grass. It just incinerates all negativity. It is said that the negativity accumulated in thousands of aeons is destroyed by bodhicitta. Or also conversely, the Buddha had said that the virtues accumulated in thousands of aeons are destroyed by a single moment of anger. So what is this virtue? The virtue is love. And when anger arises, it destroys aeons of love accumulated. So what is burned away or destroyed is love. It is bodhicitta. When bodhicitta arises for just a moment, it will bring a benefit to self and others simultaneously. So that is all on the relative level. Now on the ultimate level, we need to understand the view. That's the ultimate confession. In the Mahamudra teachings, for instance, it says that darkness of 1,000 aeons is dispelled by a single lamp flame. And that is the light of wisdom, of clear awareness. When you read that, you understand that sentient beings actually can attain enlightenment. That's really the meaning of these words. Because they all possess Buddha nature. And once their negativities are purified, they are actually Buddhas. So this is how confession is seen from the ultimate level. So beings have accumulated negativities to varying degrees and therefore experience all kinds of suffering. And all of this suffering arises from afflictions. And where are they? They are right now here within my own mind, and I keep them like my friends. I keep justifying them like my friends. So first you need to therefore recognize your own affliction, the fault of your own affliction. For example, imagine you're getting very angry. When you get very angry, you instantly recognize the anger. So anger can arise, but if you, in this moment, recognize and, for example, as a bodhisattva would cultivate bodhicitta, through cultivating bodhicitta in this moment of anger, you can actually lay aside or kind of confess the negativity of self and others. And that is a very profound point you should really think about carefully. That is also what we refer to as anger is the mirror-like wisdom on the ultimate level, from the level perspective of the Vajrayana. So when we take the Vajrayana vows, we confess through transforming the afflictions into primordial wisdom. So basically, in the three levels of the path, there are three ways of confession. One is through abandonment, the other one is through transformation, and the third one is through recognition. In the Pratimoksha path, we confess through abandonment, so we abandon the afflictive emotions gradually. And then secondly, on the Bodhisattva path, they are transformed through love and compassion. And through love and compassion, you see all sentient beings as your parents, and there's no distinction between enemies and friends. So transformation happens through bodhicitta. And then third, ultimately, according to the Vajrayana, one recognizes, one knows the nature of the afflictions, and that afflictions do not actually possess any true existence. When one understands the nature of the mind, one knows the view, one sees that, one sees the ultimate truth, that there is no real affliction, there is no distinction between confession and someone, to a confessor, there's no distinction between self and other. That's the ultimate confession. So, but there is those three ways of confessing or laying aside the afflictions. So through abandonment, transformation, and recognition. Since we are Buddhist practitioners, we have taken the refuge vow, starting from having taken the refuge vow and having become Buddhists, it is important for us to recognize our own afflictive emotions and to recognize that one's own afflictions and the afflictions of others are one and the same. Also, this is really the essence of cultivating bodhicitta, to recognize that my own afflictions are one and the same as the afflictions of others. And for this reason, because our minds are one, if I eliminate a single affliction in my own mind, then the burden of afflictions in all sentient beings in the three realms will become that much lighter. So this is how we practice the bodhisattva path on the ultimate level, how we, through bodhicitta, are able to confess and lay aside negativity of self and others simultaneously. And as a result, we create the causes for the happiness in the higher realms temporarily and ultimately enlightenment. So ultimately, all beings will attain enlightenment. Even if they wander in the three lower realms, it is said that the Buddha will never abandon them, meaning that their Buddha nature will never abandon them. They will always possess Buddha nature. That is why in the Samantabhadra prayer it says, in the beginning, from the beginning, we are all the same. We are with the ultimate primordial Buddha. And that is Buddha nature. This is the Buddha nature that will never abandon or forsake one. Even if aeons of wandering in samsara go by, one always possesses Buddha nature, and eventually, whenever the time comes that one cultivates compassion, one gradually then begins to create causes for birth in the higher realms, and ultimately one will attain enlightenment. There is no other place to go. Everyone will go toward ultimate enlightenment. There's no other place to go but enlightenment ultimately. And so that's also the meaning of when we say in the sadhanas to steer samsara from its depths, meaning that one recognizes that samsara does not really inherently exist. So there is no real ordinary kind of self-sufficiently existing samsara that possesses any kind of substances or stability. And that's because all beings possess Buddha nature. For example, even a hell being possesses Buddha nature, and one day the ice block of self-grasping will melt. And when they see the nature of the mind and cultivate an altruistic mind. So here in this verse, when we bring to mind confusion and the dualistic appearances of self and others, mainly we need to think that so all confusion comes down to the dualistic perception of self and other. And the moment these kind of perceptions arise, you should recognize, now I have become confused or deluded. And on the relative level, you, as an antidote to that, in order to let go of this dualistic perception of self and other, you cultivate immeasurable love on bodhicitta, as a result of which you will actually see the ultimate truth. So in brief, on the relative level, we cultivate immeasurable love and bodhicitta, and through bodhicitta we confess. On the ultimate level, confession occurs through practicing, through meditating on Mahamudra. And so also when it says here, each and every one of them, I confess. So each and every one also implies that you have to bring to mind each and every one of these afflictive emotions and recognize the suffering that they create. When you observe the suffering of other beings in the 6 realms, always relate them back to your own afflictive emotions in your own mind. For example, if you see the suffering of an animal and so on. So the Buddha said, in the beginning, you must recognize suffering. And that also means that recognizing the suffering of others means that a feeling arises in your mind. You feel the suffering comes to you. And then is there a way to confess or kind of lay aside and purify that suffering that has come to you? There is a way, and it is through ultimately realizing the nature of the mind, through recognizing that the seeds of all suffering are within the mind, the afflictive emotions, and our minds are one. So if you only know that, actually, it can become quite easy to tame, to let go of these afflictive emotions. So it becomes easy if you understand their fault, and that the fault is the dualistic perception of self and other. If you don't see this essential point, then you will keep the afflictive emotions like your friends and not really recognize their faults. So confession here in these words is really explained in a very, very profound way. So you must recognize the root of suffering within your own mind, the afflictive emotion. So that's most important, so that a real feeling arises within the mind. So that is not a division between the difference between the relative and the ultimate confession, which is really important. And so it says then, may it be purified within that state, within the natural state, may it naturally become purified, meaning that you recognize that the afflictive emotions do not inherently exist. And if you recognize that, then they transform into wisdom. And this is the confession of the Vajrayana through recognition or knowledge. So you recognize what the affliction really is, and this is what we call, for example, anger is the mirror-like wisdom. So we might know that, we might pay some lip service to that and say, oh, anger is mirror-like wisdom, but we also need to understand how that really is. How is anger really like mirror-like wisdom? So you need to really experience that yourself. Look at your own anger when you get really angry. What happens when you get really angry at someone? For example, someone that you actually love very much and someone you have spent many years together. One moment of anger is so destructive that sometimes people even want to kill each other. And like what has happened, that love has been destroyed through anger. And it's not the body that has changed, but it's the mind that has forsaken love. And so that is why many people spoil the love that they have, the bond of love. It is through just this moment of anger that arises. That's why we said aeons of accumulated virtue are destroyed by an instant, by one moment of anger. It is this anger, this hatred that cuts through our kind of rope to attaining enlightenment. Because what will lead us to enlightenment is love. And it is only love and nothing else. And so that is why really there is so much suffering now in the world, because people are losing their love. There is so much conflict between people, for example, between partners, male and female. Many people kill each other. Or countries attack each other. Some people even kill their own parents and so on. So what really gives one the ability to do something like that, to kill someone that you love? It is because of anger. A moment of anger destroys all the love that you have had. That is essential to understand the mirror-like wisdom and recognizing the true nature of anger on the ultimate level, meaning that you recognize that you and the other are not separate, leads to seeing the mirror-like wisdom. When you look at the anger from a non-dual perspective, then the anger makes your mind be extremely clear, In fact, the mind is so clear that there is nothing else in the mind. So you actually, in this moment, you come to the natural state of the mind. There are actually 3 occasions when we naturally come to the nature of the mind. And that is when we die and the consciousness transfers. And secondly, it is during sexual intercourse. And third, it is during the deep sleep state. But actually also when a very powerful affliction like anger or hatred arises, we also come to the ground, the fundamental nature of the mind. And that is this ground that Samantha Bhadra had talked about. There's just this single ground wherein we are all equal. So recognizing that is really the ultimate or unique way of confession. So it is to recognize that your mind and the mind of all sentient beings in the 3 realms of samsara is one and the same. Our afflictions are one and the same. Therefore, if you abandon, if you overcome your own afflictions, you are naturally benefiting sentient beings, since the minds are one. There are no separate afflictions or separate sentient beings. The basis is one. So someone who knows the nature of the mind knows that. So someone who knows the mind will reflect first. So the mind of all sentient beings in the 3 realms, is it one or are we separate from them? We are not separate from them. And if you just know that, then you know that through my confession, through my laying aside of negativity, I can actually benefit them all because I'm not separate from them. So mainly, therefore, to help others, you have to confess your own afflictive emotions and transform them into primordial wisdom. You have to recognize your own negativities, also in order to benefit others. And that's what Milarepa meant with practice or meditation has to be imbued with experience. And we all know that afflictive emotions are wisdom, and we can say that. We can say that over and over again. Afflictive emotions are really wisdom, and just giving some lip service to that is of not much benefit. You have to practice it. You have to habituate it. You have to come to a certainty, and through the certainty, really gain some confidence in knowing, is it really true? How are these afflictions really primordial wisdom? Or are they? For example, I got angry, and now I'm not angry. Now the anger is gone. But my mind is extremely clear, and there's no dualistic perception in the mind. The mind is really like a mirror. So this is how you really gain a personal experience of how the affliction of anger is the mirror-like wisdom. So you have to gain a real certainty through your own experience. And only then can you transform the afflictions. So when you gain the experience of transformation, and that is really when you can when the words really actually, the words of saying, if afflictions are wisdom really actually bear any kind of meaning. So this is basically how we need to confess ultimately. So it is through personal experience. I'm not just saying or knowing something. So first you have to understand and know, of course, but you have to experience it through actual practice. And this is what these lines here in the Sekangma prayer really show us. That's why this prayer is so profound. And so I'm just sharing these words as well as I can. So I don't maybe not know how to share so much. But this point about confession is really actually extremely important. Therefore, we need to emphasize it. So again, what really is confession? What needs to be confessed are the afflictive emotions. And for that, first you need to recognize them in your own mind. Are there afflictions? Which afflictions are in the mind? And then through recognition, let them go. So as Milarepa said, meditation has to be an actual experience. You have to actually do it. And then you can say afflictions are a primordial wisdom. Then there is no ordinary afflictive emotion. Otherwise, if you don't really experience it and just leave it with some intellectual understanding, you can tell other people afflictions are wisdom, but then you still get angry at them and you still are harsh and unkind to others, and you still allow your afflictive emotions to go completely unrestrained. And then you may perform some verbal confession and recite some prayers of confession, but that in itself is really not of much use. There is some benefit of that, of course, because at least there is an aspiration, but the real seed is not being laid aside. You need to understand that the actual seed, what the source of confession, the source of what needs to be laid aside is your own afflictive emotion and not the words that you say. So that is what is meant with gaining some experience. So through experience, you have to actually transform the afflictive emotions into primordial wisdom. So now, Dharma friends, please take a break for 20 minutes. Namo, or homage to the Sangha.
Sangha。这个等一下，这个仁波切这个已经法教要休息了，不过这一段大概是有史以来最长的一段，我尽量的来翻译，好不好？那就是我们这一季呢，就是万法本始清净之心性，自他二显好坏分别中，所具一切贪爱与迷乱，一一忏悔自处中清净。那这一个寄颂是有非常多的这个深意的，我们应该要好好的了解。那一开始我们就是迷惘自他二元对立，有这种好坏的这个分别相，那我们应该对这种执着有升起这个忏悔，并且能够这个统整一切都是来自于我们内心的这个迷惘。因为我们的内心的迷惘，一切的生出一切的不善行，那么自无始以来所累积的这个业，对这些呢加以忏悔。那什么叫做忏悔呢？那么就是主要就是这个我们对于业的作用呢，我们知道欲知过去因现今生受者是，那过去所累积的一些不善行呢，那造成了这一世的这种病苦，我们知道它的这个根源是来自于哪里的？这个我们可以知道说，知道说它的本源来自哪里是，不管是说是什么是让我们快乐，什么是让我们不快乐，都是来自于我们的烦恼，然后忏悔这些。那么我们的过去的种种的一种这种过患跟这个业障，那么所以呢，我们有这个忏悔分成相对层次的忏悔以及就近的忏悔。那在就近层次的这个忏悔是没有主客的这个能忏所忏主客的这个区别的。当我们有所执着的时候，那我们就升起了一种念头，这已经偏离了一种无念的一个状态。不管我们做的是十恶，或者是甚至是无间罪呢，我们都是来自于这种烦恼的这种执着。那么我们要知道，世界上有如此多的这个众生，如此多的这个痛苦，都来自于这个业的作用。那我们对于我们这个种种的一些困难来讲，比如说贫穷啊，或者生病啊、病苦这一些呢，我们都有对治的方法，比如说透过修法、修施身法等等，了知说这个都是业的累积，不管是来自于三毒，或者是来自于五毒。那么在这个就是在我们这个心事中出现的这些烦恼，并且执其为实而受累积业，让我们产生的种种的这个苦报。那所以我们要忏悔的就是这些烦恼。那么了知如何忏悔呢？就是要了知这个烦恼的升起，了知保持正念，保持烦恼念头的升起，回到本来的状态，这就是佛的状态。那我们在这世界上就是有两种层次的苦，一种是有间的苦，一种是无间的苦。 那这个在这种无间的苦是不得暂息的，所以呢我们要对于这些苦的来源，我们要深信业力这个，但是现今的世界上是很少人相信这种业力的这个作用的。我们要知道说业力这个苦主要是来自于内心的烦恼，因为我们过去伤害了别人，这是一种过患，这是不对的。对于这一些呢，我们要产生这个悔恨之心，然后呢要来这个把他这些恶的这个行为或念头把它放掉，把它舍弃，对于他人的伤害，他们的受苦呢回头自然会报应到我们自己身上，所以我们要了知这种业的作用，这是所谓世俗的这个忏悔，了知到我们自己所行所造呢，或者自己的这种执着造成这个不但是自己更是众生的这个痛苦。我们要知道六道众生的痛苦都是来自于这种执着，是这个世俗相对地的，都是来自于一种无明的这个造作。对于这种苦呢，我们要升起无量的慈心来悲心呢，来对那个来解脱或者解脱，这就是一种对治的方法。那么忏悔之后就把它放在一边了。我们要知道内心升起烦恼的时候，比如说我们看到这个蚊子，我们就想要去打它，因为它会让我们不舒服，但是我们知道说蚊子本身也是有痛苦的，能够对它升起无量的慈心，那这也算是一种忏悔。因为我们知道说它也是一个有情众生，它也会肚子饿，那我们肚子饿的时候其实是很难受的，所以我们有这样子的方式能够来同理它的这种痛苦，升起慈悲的话，这是一种对治的方法。所以呢，我们要必须很清楚内心升起的什么样的烦恼，是贪吝的心呢，然后在内心有自他的对立这样子，那么这样子能够加以对治。或者是说在现在一些人这个一些国家一些地区，他们变得很贫穷，所以不得不吃肉了，然后杀动物来吃，那我们要造成这种业报的产生，所以我们了知之后要去除掉这种烦恼的起源，这个就是降服我们自己的烦恼，我们自己要反思我们的心念是从何而来，那我们的心念如何跟那个烦恼对应，然后又变成结合，变成一个更强烈的这个烦恼。然后除了嗔心之外，其他的5种烦恼也是一样的一个过程。我们的不但是我们自己的烦恼，三界众生的烦恼的这个产生的过程也是一样的。那我们要如何生出这个出离心，那远离我们的迷惘跟烦恼呢？那我们要知道众生的心跟我们自己心的本质是相同的，烦恼的本质也是一样的，烦恼都相同，本质都相同，都是一切恶的来源，因为我们的嗔恨心造成我们这个现今疫情的这个原因。那这个业呢，主要是来自因为嗔恨心，然后甚至强烈到要伤害别人，杀害别人。所以呢我们要去找嗔心到底在哪里，在我们心中啊，却看似不但是我们把嗔心就是知道这个嗔心在我们心中，却把它看成是我们的朋友，跟他很好的相处，继续为他养料，继续让他嗔心继续增长，这就是我们的过患。因为我们有的烦恼了，那么我们其实就是浪费了我们这个人生非常暇满的一个状态。我们知道从这个人生难得，从数量上来讲，从因果上来讲，从譬喻来讲，都是非常难得的。那我们如何来这个浪费了我们这个人生，这个殊胜的人生，难得人生的这个机会呢？因为呢，我们不了解业的作用了。那么所以我们这个所以我们要做的这个就是，当我们在造作一些行业的时候，马上知道说我们这样做是错的，这种就是一种忏悔。那因为我们过去是有发生一些事情，我们有所行恶，造恶业，然后但是我们有忏悔，但是即使这一世的这个果报成熟了，但是我们也会找到解决的方法。如果说在过去是行恶的时候，我们没有加以忏悔， 那这一世呢，当果报成熟的时候，恐怕这些人就没有找不到解决之道了。这就好像说，这个以生病的做例子来讲的话，我们生了一个疾病，但是因为过去是曾经有忏悔，所以这一辈子就能找到解决疾病的这个方法，或者是遇到好的医生啊，吃药手术等等。那过去式的忏悔有找出治疗的方法，如果没有忏悔的话，没有什么治疗可以做的。所以当我们已经造下业的这个种子的话，自然它有成熟的这个时候。所以我们这个烦恼呢，是可以透过这个忏悔而来给它净化的。那当我们这个世俗的这个烦恼呢，就是来自于我执之心。如果说我们能够长养利他之心的话，我们的我执自然就会减少。那我们就因为我们这个利他之心，就有摧毁负面能力、负面的情况、一些烦恼的这种能力。我们要知道，星星之火可以燎原，所以呢，嗔心小小的一个嗔心，它可以烧毁整个功德林的。那所谓的我们要怎么样去摧毁我们这个烦恼呢？主要就是靠上我们这个菩提心跟利他心。如果说我们有菩提心，马上就可以自利跟利他。那究竟的忏悔是什么呢？就是会了解这个本质的这个作用。我们要大手印来讲说，提到说一灯照破千年暗。那众生可以得到证悟，都因为众生都有佛性。那如果说造了一些负面的业，透过忏悔就可以清净。那一切的苦都是来自于烦恼，但是烦恼存在何处呢？在我们的心中，可是我们却把它当作一个朋友来对待。所以我们要了解到这些烦恼的过犯。当嗔心升起的时候，如果我们了知这个嗔心的升起呢，我们应该要修持菩提心，了知嗔心的升起，放下自他的这个过犯的地方。所以呢，我们要知道嗔心呢，究竟是面向是一种大圆镜智，这是一个金刚乘的这个讲法。我们既然受的这个金刚乘的这个戒律，我们应该了知到这一点，如何去了知这个它的本性。所以呢，我们在修三乘道的，在别解脱乘，主要是要舍弃不善行，那知非即舍。第二个修行菩萨道呢，就是要透过转化菩提心的转化，就是知道一切众生过去成为我父母，那我们在我们父母面前没有怨怼的这个对象，这个之心，这个就是菩提心。透过菩提心的转化我们自己的这个业障跟烦恼。但是在金刚乘呢，我们就透过了知这个本性，这个透过见地的了知，我们了知到烦恼的本质是没有自性的，所以有知道它的见地是来自于自心，它是没有自性的。然后忏悔也没有能忏所忏，忏悔者与所忏的对象的这个区别，这个就是究竟上是没有差异的，这个就是所谓的这个究竟的这个忏悔。那我们今天都是佛教都受的戒，应该我们知道能忏所忏的这个本质是一样的，我们的烦恼跟众生的烦恼本质上是一样的。那能够了解到这一点，三界的一切烦恼，我们对三界的这种负担自然就会减轻了。我们要知道透过这个菩提心来行菩提行的这种忏悔，不但是能够利益自己，还能够对于这个究竟来讲还可以得到解脱的，因为得到究竟的这种证悟。我们知道这个佛性我们即使我们生在这个轮回，生在这个恶道的话，佛性亦不减，我们也不要去舍弃，还可以解脱的，因为众生都有佛性，根本上都是这样子。这就是普贤王如来祈愿文所讲的第一道恶结果恶的原因，因为我们都是本初佛，我们都具备具足的这个佛性。那因为我们有了悲心，能够受生善道，那么唯一的道路是什么？唯一的结果是什么？唯有走向究竟的这个证悟。所以因为我们的悲心，我们的往修善，这唯一的目的地就是那个究竟的证悟。所以我们要做的是从根本来去除我们的这个轮回。那根源它是没有实相的，它是没有自性的，众生都有佛性。然后 即使今天是身为这个冰块了，但是也因为可以因为利他之心而融化这个冰块。我们要知道一切的烦恼，一切的过患都是来自于自他二元的执着。当他这种分别心、执着心、二元对立的心升起的时候，我们就要知道说，这就是我们的我执，这就是我们在执着二元对立的。所以对治的方法，一开始是修菩提心，修无量慈心，然后渐渐能够见到究竟的这个真谛。当我们修菩提心呢，无量慈心的时候，菩提心就是一种忏悔，那我们就可以慢慢的可以来修持禅修这个大手印了。当我们一一忏悔，每一的烦恼呢，都知道它所造成的这种苦，以及其他众生的这个苦，而回向自己的这个回归到自己的这个烦恼，这个回到自己的这个佛性。我们所谓的佛，就是了知众生的苦，也了知自己的这个烦恼的本质何在。那么忏悔的这个苦的这个方法是什么呢？我们主要就是了知心性它的这个本质，我们了解种种苦的这种种子是来自于我们的自心，那我们的这个心的这个本质是跟众生心的本质本性是等同的，所以透过这样子来降服我们的烦恼，那主要就是要去除掉我们对自他二元对立的这种执着。那么在这个寄诵这个一一忏悔自处中清净，在这一句话是有非常深的这个意义的。我们也知道一切的苦都来自于我们心中的二元对立的这种执着，不管是说那我们可以做忏悔也有两个层次，相对的忏悔跟究竟层次的忏悔。自处中清净的意思是了知我们本来是没有烦恼的，那么把烦恼升起的时候，我们知道它是没有本质，是没有自性的，我们能够透过我们的智慧的觉知跟正念把它转化成一种般若。所以我们也常常也讲说，嗔心的清净面就是大圆净智。我们要知道这个的理解不只是嘴巴讲的，应该要知道它真正运作的这个道理。当我们内心身心升起的时候，它是如何运作的呢？那我们在两个好朋友之间多年的知己，也可能因为嗔心的升起而摧毁。因为当嗔心升起的时候，就是我们彼此之间的爱心，那个慈爱之心失去了。那么我们要了解的是，重点不是在我们的身体，而是在我们的心。在一刹那之间嗔心升起的时候，我们就摧毁了多劫的这个功德。那么断了，不但是这样子，因为我们失去了慈爱心，也断了我们证悟的这个绳索被剪断了，主要都是来自于爱心的失去。所以不管是这样，当这种情况产生的时候，在伴侣之间可以互相砍杀，也可以子女也可以杀父母，国与国之间自然会有彼此的这个征战。那这些都是从哪里来？都是来自于我们的嗔心。我们能够了解它的这个作用，能够照见它的本来无自性的面貌，这就是大圆净智。我们要知道自他本质无二的，嗔心可以自我们让我们的自心放在一个非常清明的这个状态，没有比它更有威力，可是同时也越接近我们清明的自性。我们知道在三种情况之下呢，是我们很接近自心的，是在我们死亡的那一刹那，在我们男女交合的时候，或者是在我们深度睡眠。其实第四种将是我们嗔心升起的时候，我们也是很接近我们的心性的。所以在普贤王如来祈愿文呢，在这个提到说，在这个根基之上，我们是等同的，你的心跟三界众生的心都是一样的。如果我们能够舍弃掉我们的烦恼，我们就可以在这个时候算是利益到众生了，因为我们的根基都是同样的。如果了此这一个道理的话，我们就可以做真正的这个忏悔，因为一切的本质都是相同的，彼此不分的，知道透过我们自己的忏悔可以利益到其他的这个众生，以忏悔自己的烦恼转化为本初智，而能够利益众生。弥勒巴祖师也在此讲到说，禅修是应该与自己生活的这个经验跟体验来结合的。那如果我们只是嘴巴讲，这是没有太大的作用，没有太大的利益。我们应该了知，要能够它的作用，而能够升起信心跟确信，真的是这样子吗？那我们了 了解它的作用，就可以从根源来对治。那如果说我自己嗔心的时候呢，那我就能够不再生气，心就很清明的，因为很清楚的了知，有保持在正念之中，清楚的照见了知烦恼的升起，所以心在这个时候很清明，就像镜子一样。这个就是一个我们所谓真正生活上的体验跟经验。因为有了这种经验呢，我们能够坚信，对它能够有信心，而能够转化我们内心的这个烦恼。这就是我们应该做的如何的忏悔的，透过我们自己内在的自己生活这样的经验，除了了知当理智上的了知之外，更要进一步的修行。所以这个色康玛在这点上面是非常非常的深刻的，非常甚深的。我想跟各位以我所知的所了解的跟各位在分享。那么忏悔者就是对治的就是主要就是我们的烦恼。当我们烦恼如何忏悔呢？就是烦恼升起的时候马上就了知，然后真的有这个烦恼吗？它的本质是什么？提炼出它的本质本来是无性无自性的，是空性的，然后就让它能够放掉，可以舍弃。那这个就是所谓的忏悔，这就是弥勒日巴祖师讲的禅修应该跟我们的经验相结合。那我们要知道烦恼的本质跟我们本处智的本质是互通的，所以理论上那个了解是没有用的，因为理论上的了解我们还会生气，因为我们对我们自己的烦恼还没有加以真正的束缚。那么嘴巴上的忏悔，心念上没有改变，这个没有太大的利益的。但是我们要究竟的忏悔是什么？我们要了解它真正的种子是哪里来的，然后能够彻底的把它清除跟消除的。所以这种根据实际上生活的体验转化而有的忏悔，跟只是嘴巴上这个口会实不会的这种忏悔是有很大的差距的。因为只是嘴巴上的忏悔，这个忏悔的这个嗔心的种子，烦恼的种子还没有被真正的这个净除的。所以我们应该了解说真正的重点是在哪里，是要在烦恼上，因为我们应该透过经验的累积而来把它加以净化。所以呢在这边呢我们就先休息一阵子，然后南无桑嘎雅，就是仁波切这个归敬这个僧团。好，请各位稍作休息。
이제기만이라 소소를 샤 소랑 살타질 지성을 하자 책나보리디 그리지 강는디 소소샤 소되는 동무디 산지 좀디지가 송디는 등이 시발사 손도 소시 등이 맞차 소차 차오데 등이 하고 그래 예를 들면 아기 참아 등이 하고 그래 등이 하고 하나들이 그 방도 로들이 걸 메셔하는 기다다 라리 소비면은 소나 특별히 바로 걸 메셔다다 송송데 같은 소와치고 소타를 소와치데 소와치 보는 거리 능내 시발산에 공동체 방도 요리 되니 되는지 능이 마시나 방도 로jo고 말이 방도 로마 좀 용용고 말이 능이 뭐 고독도 되게 참 하거나 다디 방을 타주면 가르치나 다가 제고서는 로세는 거 능이 라지 탐색 거는 거를 다 로를 소시 등인데 싸우다네 다다다지 샤자공 훈도 다다 주의지 마사 훈도 사성 제지 성공게 강에지 훈도 될라 되는 명제고 그래 예수 하바를 남들과 내 랑토나서나 님종소리 또 님종거리 들이 사실나 많이 있어 데이터를 라지 조금 나서서 님종지들이 조리 님종 이반 종아지는 그 타고하니 능이지 신지 방도 로데 되는 님종을 하고 요리 되는 다 동당을 능이 시설 다 방을 로데 다리리 이제도 되는 유명한 시래 파트로 장가자야 이 말이 다 철대 뭐지 능이 짜와지 유명한 말로들 로아를 두고 동네에서 뉴모바 돌는데 뉴모바 돌는데 뉴모스 랑 생포 뉴모바 돌때는데 제일들이 나중에 이가 동네 찾다 때자다 말에 빠르들 다 사주시 뭐 동생으로 도당에 다 접대를 봐 접대는데 봐 주소 드니 단념이 제도 로탄들 안에 봐 용어를 라지 tamche dungni tsa dungni shipar saso ta kumdung pa tapte ta sajige ta de demba ni somari otok demba to dang demba le jumde hwami machina dungni pa do lo ni guyo ba jumde shi ki che bo jure shi na tri jumde ji che bo chi na tri ta pa tap ta le la wa go re ta to dang demba asin de to so ja so la ta o ta de chani yum ba to ram ji shi na 들이 이제 말이 밖에 들이 somebody 뉴모 예시 체면은 독세롱도 좀 봐야지 들이 나와서 다 하고서 오 너희 뉴모 누구 자 뉴모가 랑김이 봐 하고 요래 뉴모가 대신아 대 미나들이 다다 디 소유문이 생각 네 야와는 생각 답지 이 시간 민주고 이 시간이 다 소리는 생각하는 민주래 로켓 생각하는 민주래 추가도 로켓 생각하는 마음이는 내가 도와주러 선물로 내고요 민도 마음이 제발지 그렇게 것도 뭐라는데 대리를 산재에 말 생긴 거 아니죠 당가서 이제 람 인제가 이성도 그것도 뭐라는 이제 생 대식 좀 보내지 람이 갈 대식 좀 보여도 당 호재지 차대요 거를 됐다 동해지 요래 나디 대와는 하고는 요래 그 가리 세는 요리들 다랬단 말이야 제발해지 오 다들 좀 들이 사자집에 사진 강가면 쏘고 오 벨까봐 동도 사품만 봐요 두배서 뭐 쳐서 한그 사진 거만 털면 샘기 탐색들이 샘기 탐색 상호 대식 뭐 상호요 봐 그래서 유명을 하지 시뭐 하고는 들이 다 사진 것은 내가 사진 그 잡아 다 변는데 다 사진을 남대도 띵서 봤더니 들이 사진 송서 봐 가장 사빠 샤와 두바닥 타와 세부대로 두바닥 타와 사진 뭐 돈을 그래서 들이 타탁 이제 맞지 봐지 그래도 너지 창인은 이제 맞지 봐지 이제 맞지 봐나 들이 너지 암지 너지 창지 이제 너무 다 봐리 이제 맞지 봐야 되더니 딱히 보전에 받쳐도 되장 다다베 따르던 좋은 거에 하장 가지고 소소샤서들 유몽 빵자는 유몽도 빵지 이시기 카카 말이지 유몽 랑지시베들이 유몽을 랑지시다가 동마도 저쪽에 잡서 예송에 책도만 말봐 다 하고서 당문이 딱 잡힌 채에서 나와 사집에 무엇도 다 동의도 하고 놓아도 생기 용지 말이 따뜻한 잡을 동해 가리 용도 용지 말이 달래 좀 되지 다들 가리 방문데 방에 탑 녹에 뭐독에 탑 녹지 방도 요로 방도 로로 탑에 하고리 녹지 다다다 다라는 게 세부도 성운 세부라는 독서 하고 두고요 이 하고서 소소샤소들 랑살 다들 유몽 가가면 도 유몽이 시 유몽들하지 시레스 하고서 대니를 사제에 말해서 진행하죠. 좀 책단 사고 유몽 가까이요 말. 빠다가 유몽 가까이요 말해서 유몽랑 이시 소소샤소라 살다 주제에서 배책 된 사보리. 내가 다 됐다 오면 시시로 말지. 라고 쳐왔다 좀 먹고 제. 근데 니랑 유몽랑 계시더니 기본나 말을 자세히 지금 세 카바들이 하닥던 사보리들이 라만 개바 망보고 송가라 송용 당하지 일어나도 만담아도 요 말이 송 매하고 매대 대대들이 따라는 게 실험 마시는 따라 로바통제 제와 집을 파쇼요 얼마나 막해도 양 말에 용대야 요 말에 애들이 시작하면 같이 동사다 소소자서라 사다죠 책이라 대주벌을 시작하더니 사장 돌아있잖아 땡사본 맨날 가 나오지
So in that same verse, and in the end it says, so each and everything I confess may be purified within that state. Actually, just these lines here, these two lines here, are extremely profound. And so this, each and every one, I confess. So we have said the Buddha said, first you have to recognize suffering. And so you have to, what it means is you have to recognize all of the suffering in the 6 realms. The suffering of the smallest little animal, the slightest suffering, you have to recognize it. You have to recognize the suffering of yourself and also others. And only when you recognize suffering will you develop a wish to abandon suffering. Just like it is said in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, like even those Shravakas, like on the lower vehicle, they strive as if putting out a fire on their heads. So in the Pratimoksha path, actually, there is a great emphasis on diligence. They strive with great diligence because they have recognized suffering. And if you recognize suffering, you will want to abandon the origin of suffering. If you do not recognize suffering, you will not want to abandon the origin of suffering. So in order to develop this mind of wanting to abandon suffering, you have to understand that all suffering comes from karma, from one's own action. And then once you understand that, you find a method to abandon the origins of that suffering. So to do that, you have to bring to mind first all the suffering of all the sentient beings in the 6 realms of samsara. For example, this is what we do when we do a 100-day retreat on the Ngondro, the preliminaries. And in that context, for example, Jigten Sumgön had said that, to me, the preliminary practices are more profound than even the main part practices, because in the preliminary practices, we first develop a sense of renunciation, a wish to emerge from suffering that has to arise in the beginning. And that arises through the preliminaries, the Ngondro. Also, Je Tsongkhapa, and he laid out the Lamrim, the great graduated path, specifically the text of the excellent path to enlightenment. So also here Je Tsongkhapa begins with renunciation and then moves on to the twofold bodhicitta and so on. And so we need to cultivate renunciation. And how do we cultivate renunciation? From the bottom of your heart, you have to recognize suffering. When you recognize suffering, you will want to abandon suffering. And so then from that, you move to the ultimate truth. So once you have recognized suffering, you have identified that at the root are the afflictive emotions, but then, of course, you can't count all of these afflictive emotions. So you have to condense into its essence. So you condense first the suffering, the immense suffering of all the beings in the 6 realms of samsara, all comes down to the 6 afflictive emotions. And then these 6 afflictive emotions, then you condense them into your own mind, meaning you find them in your own mind. So you find the cause of suffering of self and others in your own mind, and then these afflictive emotions are further condensed into ignorance. It all arises from ignorance. So ultimately, this is how we understand, how we come back to the root of karma. And when you really have such a profound understanding of karma, you want to practice. There will be a wish to, an unchanging, like a steadfast wish to engage in practice. So to develop that wish, you first have to understand the suffering of yourself and others. And then you find a method to abandon the origin of suffering. And as a method, the Buddha taught the twofold truth, the relative and the ultimate truth. So the relative truth is the infallibility of karma, cause and effect. If you don't understand karma, you will never develop a real wish to abandon suffering. So therefore, understanding karma is extremely important, and to really trust in karma. If you really trust in karma, then actually you will be able to abandon the origins of suffering quite easily, because you go right to the ultimate essence of it. So that is the meaning of each and everything I confess. So here you must understand the actual nature of the 6 afflictive emotions. Milarepa had said, when you realize that there is no difference between afflictions and primordial wisdom, you have gained the ultimate level of realization. And so that is really the root of the ultimate Buddhist view, is to understand the true nature of the afflictive emotions. And so that even though the afflictive emotions are the root of all suffering, and they are afflictive emotions, but only if you do not know their true nature. When you understand what these afflictions really are, then that is what we call they mature into the 5 afflictions, mature into the 5 wisdoms. And then when these mature, then the 5 wisdoms then ripen into the limitless pure lands of the 5 Dhyani Buddhas. The Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya pure lands all manifest from this knowing, from this maturation. For as long as the mind is not matured temporarily, we continue to dwell in the 6 realms of samsara. So the point is that the only difference is whether or not the mind has become matured. In the Samantabhadra prayer, it says, if you recognize it, you are a Buddha. Not recognizing it, you are a sentient being wandering in samsara. And also in the Samantabhadra prayer, it says, there is a single ground, yet 2 paths and 2 fruitions. The single ground is Buddha nature, and the 2 paths, what are the 2 paths? Even though you always possess Buddha nature, there is a path that leads to suffering, and there is a path that leads to nirvana, the transcendence of suffering. And again, what's the difference between those 2 paths? It is knowing or not knowing your true nature, this basis, this ground. And that also relates to that quote in the Ganges Mahamudra we mentioned. The darkness of 1,000 aeons is dispelled by a single lamp flame. So when you attain the state of enlightenment, it's not just your own enlightenment, really, because all sentient beings have that basis. They all possess the same seed, the ground of Buddha nature. It is just a question, do they recognize it or not? Recognizing the afflictions, they become the 5 wisdoms, and then they ripen into the 3 kayas and the pure lands and so forth. So this is how the Buddha, for this purpose, the Buddha had laid out the 3-fold path. So the other day, last week, we also mentioned how the Buddha described the natural state of the mind. And so he said that it is profoundly peaceful. It is free from any elaborations, luminosity, and uncompounded. That also relates to Mahamudra, or we call it the unchanging state of Vajradhara. He represents the uncompounded nature. Whatever is compounded phenomenon is impermanent by nature. Whatever is uncompounded is unchanging. And that is represented by the Dharmakaya Buddha Vajradhara. So if you understand this point here, each and everything I confess, you understand that what is to be confessed are the afflictive emotions, and what confesses is primordial wisdom, and that which is to be confessed and that which confesses are non-dual, are inseparable actually. It is also said that when you recognize the true nature of afflictive emotions, all suffering becomes an ocean of blissful nectar. So these words are also extremely meaningful, and they show us that the true nature of the afflictive emotions is really empty. When you look at them, they really aren't there. They are not really actually there, are they? So now you have understood that, you've gained a real experience. And so this is what needs to happen, in order to eliminate suffering, you need to gain an actual experience. And so now, how to recognize suffering is, of course, suffering does not inherently exist, and you have understood that, but on the other hand, on the relative level, sentient beings do experience suffering in the 6 realms of samsara on an ongoing basis. So now, for example, we can see how much suffering there is in the world. And even though there is so much suffering, is there anything we can do about it? There is. If you have a real wish to abandon suffering, it becomes quite easy, actually. So you need to understand for that the root, the seed of all suffering lies within your own mind. Then it becomes quite easy. So I confess each and everything means to recognize that the afflictive emotions of myself and all beings are not separate. And there are no separate the existing afflictions, meaning that the nature of the afflictions is primordial wisdom. So therefore it says, may it be purified within that state. Or as we said, the Samantabhadra prayer says, if you recognize it, you are a Buddha. Not recognizing it, you are a being wandering in samsara. These words are extremely profound. It is just to recognize that afflictive emotions do not exist, and they're not separate things. The afflictive emotions themselves are primordial awareness. So that is, may it be purified within that state. These words are really extremely profound, and maybe I myself don't know how to explain that so well. I'm just giving you some introductions based on my own feeling. But the Serkangma prayer really can be explained by the great scholars in a very profound way. So the Khenpos and many of the scholars have explained that very profoundly. And also they have said that there's actually, aside from this 7-branch prayer, there is actually no other 7-branch prayer in the Vajrayana, a secret mantra 7-branch prayer. Also, I haven't heard of any other. So in any case, even though I might not be able to explain that so well, I'm really explaining it for the disciples from the bottom of my heart, because they requested it. But by no means am I a great scholar or accomplished master. I have really not much learning. But I do recognize the importance of the Serkangma prayer. So in these lines, really, these lines in the end are extremely profound. So each and everything I confess, may it be purified within that state. Just on these lines, much commentary can be given. And I encourage you also to discuss it with each other, because the meaning is very profound.
那我们继续再讲这个同样这个一季这个最后这个句子，就是一一忏悔自处中清净。那么这个它的意义是非常的深远的。我们所谓的一一忏悔，主要讲的就是我们的佛性。这个一一忏悔的佛在过去曾经讲说，我们要止苦，要先了苦，要对了知一切六道众生的这个苦，包含是最小的一个生物它的苦，我们也要了知，还要了解自己的这个苦，才能够出现这个出离这个苦的这个念头。那么在声闻缘觉圣呢，他们要了苦呢，要止苦呢，就好像这个救他们自己头上在烧的这个头一样，如同救头人。那菩萨道的这个行者呢，这是他们是透过精进，他们了解苦的这个本质，想要舍弃苦因呢，要了解自己的这个苦来自于自己过去所造的这个业，然后舍弃掉苦的这个因，那么这个了解到一切六道众生的苦也是这样子的。那在我们这个100天闭关的这个前行的这个闭关呢，也有这样子的思维，让我们升起出离心。那当然我们 们的教主吉田松文祖师过去也讲说，前行是比正行更加重要、更加深远，因为它能够让我们生出这个出离心，跟想要脱离这个痛苦、解脱痛苦的这种决心。在宗喀巴大师这个菩提道次第广论，他也讲到二谛菩提心的长养。那我们生出这个，我们这个如何的保持我们的这个出离心，要怎么样能够生出出离心的主要，我们首先要做的就是要了解苦的这个本质，然后了解苦的这个作用之后，我们自然想要去舍弃这个痛苦。那什么是究竟的苦呢？我们要知道，就是说根本的这个本源是来自于我们自己的烦恼。那六道众生的苦也来自于六种烦恼。那么如果说我们把它浓缩到这个六道众生的苦呢，可以浓缩到自己内心的苦，那么由自他这种所有众生的苦浓缩到自己的自心，然后自心的这个苦的根源再把它浓缩到就是无明。那我们要知道说，这个就是我们要回到业的这个根本的业缘是在哪里，我们要了解这个业的这个这个它的这个作用，能够升起能够深信这个业的这个作用呢，跟那个我们才能够真正的升起对它的这个坚强的这个行动力，想要去除这个苦。我们了解自他的这个苦，然后舍弃呢，也有修这个相对层次的这个菩提心呢，舍弃，因为我们知道说这个如果不舍弃的话，它业力这个不会这个减少的。那我们要从根源舍弃的话，那才能够止苦。我们要相信业力的作用，就能够很容易放下这个苦因。这就是一一忏悔的意思。我们要了解六种烦恼的根源何在。我们要知道弥勒日巴祖师过去曾讲，当我们了解烦恼根本出自无差别的时候，这就是一个究竟的证悟，没有比这个更高的这个证悟了。当我们去了解到真正去了解烦恼的这个本质的时候，在了解到这些烦恼的本质，我们就能够成熟我们自己的五智，然后成熟于无量净土的五方佛，不管是法身或者是报身净土，皆来自于我们这种知识的这个成熟。那普贤王如来祈愿文也讲到说，这个了知即为佛，不了则为六道众生的轮回波的这个众生。里面也提到说，基一到二，结果二。所谓的基一，同样的根基就是我们的佛性；到二呢，就是我们这个涅槃的解脱道跟那个轮回的这个受苦报。那这个差别就是在我们了知与不了知的差别。在恒河大手印里面也有提到说，一灯照破千年暗。当我们证悟的时候，不只是我们的自己的证悟，众生也有相同的这个根本，然后我们差别就是在我们了知与不了知。当我们证悟了，成熟我们的智慧了，那么这样子，我们前几天就是礼拜天有讲，上一次讲到心性的本质有4种这个形容词，它是非常深沉的这个宁静，它是离系的，它是一种不造作自然的任运不造作的，它是有一个大悲心的体现。那么这个就是所谓的这个不造作的这个呢，就是不动的这个金刚持不动的这个状态跟境界。在这边讲到说一一忏悔，那是什么要怎么忏悔的对象是什么？就是我们的烦恼，因为我们的对我们升起烦恼这加以忏悔。所忏的呢，要用什么方法来忏？就是我们自己的本初智。所以我们要如果能够这样子的话，那我们要了解到烦恼升起，我们要了知烦恼的升起，并且去检视它，了知它没有实存，它无自性，它是这个空性，这个就是个人经验的这个修行的这个经验。那么它苦是知道是不实存的。如果能够这样子的话，我们一切的烦恼都是我们究竟乐的一种甘露大海，都转化成这个究竟乐的甘露大海了。 那相对的层次来讲呢，六道众生还是有苦的。世界上的苦，我们可以做些什么事情吗？当然可以，就是我们为了众生能够离苦得乐的，一切的苦都是来自我们自己的内心。所以一一忏悔呢，能够了知面对我们跟众生六道众生的烦恼的本源是不分的，都是一种本出自的。那么从自处之中呢，在这个地方呢，自处中清净，就是这个道理。是普贤王如来祈愿文所讲到的，了知即为佛，不了为六道轮回的众生。那我自己的所学是有份的，所有限的，所以我也不确定我是不是能够这个讲得很好很正确，但是我已经尽力的为各位来讲解我所知道的这个色康玛的这个道理，因为这个是非常有意义的一个很重要的一个祈愿文。我也为了因为弟子这样祈请，所以我才虽然我知道自己能力有限，我要尽量的为各位来宣讲。那当然其他学者会有每一个都有很多的这个对于这个色康玛有很多这个注释，大家也可以去参考。那我所了解的所知道的，除了这个色康玛之外呢，我们这个色康玛在金刚乘里面并没有其他讲到这个机支供养的这个法。那我虽然没有办法，能力有限，没有办法一一的详解呢，详细的解释，我已经尽力来各位的宣讲了。那么但是我知道它的这个重要性，光是这一句一一忏悔自处中清净就有很多这个可以讨论的。我希望你们将来有机会也可以彼此讨论，可以进一步了解它的这个深意何在。
As the branch of confession, which mainly purifies the affliction of anger. So we have said that when an affliction arises, that then we must recognize it and lay it aside. So they can be laid aside through confession. Then next is the next verse is the antidote to jealousy. It is rejoicing. So it says, with a happy mind, I rejoice in all virtues of all the victorious ones of the three times, of the assemblies of the superior ones, of the unceasing wheel of the two accumulations, and of sentient beings. So rejoicing, the branch of rejoicing, is the antidote to mainly jealousy. So the words here are quite straightforward. But so regarding this wheel of the two accumulations here, the two accumulations, so there is the accumulation of merit and wisdom. The cause is the accumulation of merit, and merit is really love. When the Buddhas, we have said the superior ones, the Buddhas of the three times, they have perfected this unceasing wheel of the two accumulations, meaning that at all times, all the Buddhas only think about mother sentient beings because they love all beings. And that is what we call merit. So the Buddha actually himself also said, do not cling to my body, do not grasp at my speech. You can't grasp it, you can't hold on to it. You can't really, it's something that you can't really keep. But what you really have to see is my mind. If you want to really see me, look at your own mind, understand the mind. And also Milarepa explained that when he taught on the 6 paramitas, as you mentioned before, he said that you will not find the Buddha anywhere outside of yourself. To find the Buddha, look at the characteristic or the nature of your own mind. So where is the Buddha? The Buddha is within your own mind. It is your own Buddha nature. And Buddha is the mind that we call a mind Buddha, when a mind that is a union of emptiness and compassion. And so, in brief, anyone who has a mind has Buddha nature. So we all can become Buddhas. But the Buddha said himself So he said all beings are actually Buddhas, however, beings are obscured by adventitious stains. So you all are Buddhas, but you are obscured by stains, the stains of dualistic grasping. This is what has led to the appearance of samsara. So we have mentioned that before, there's no need to mention it again now. So regarding that, it is also said in the Uttara Tantra, once one understands the natural state of the mind, then there is nothing to be purified and nothing to be accomplished or added to the mind. The mind spontaneously is the unchanging nature of mind spontaneously is perfect as it is stainless as it is. So the Buddha nature itself is stainless. From the perspective of Buddha nature, there is no Buddhahood that has to be attained and nothing that has to be removed. For example, in the Dzogchen teachings, the three statements that strike the vital points, in the commentary that Khenpo Münso Rinpoche gave on that, he said that when you recognize it is, the first one is to recognize the essence of Rigpa, of awareness. And when you recognize it, it is seeing something that has already been there before. It's not seeing something new. It's something that has already been there. This is the recognition of Rigpa's essence. So when you look at your mind, you see what's already there. And then the second statement is to decide upon this single nature, and just this nature, meaning that you gain complete certainty. So having recognized Rigpa, you gain complete certainty that there is no other Buddha than that. And then the third statement is then you gain confidence, assurance in the liberation of thoughts. And so actually, even though you have accomplished the first and the second statement, it's hard to gain confidence in the liberation of thoughts. And so basically, until one has really gained confidence in seeing the nature of the mind, afflictive emotions arise on the relative level and we accumulate karma. And as long as we accumulate karma, we need to destroy self-grasping with love. This is how we purify self-grasping. So until we have cleared away all stains of dualistic grasping at self and other, we need to cultivate an altruistic mind. We can never separate from an altruistic mind. If you never separate from altruism, you are accumulating the two accumulations continuously. And so, as a result, the Buddhas manifest as the three kayas. The Dharmakaya is like space, and the Sambhogakaya is like a rainbow in the sky, and there are a multitude of Sambhogakaya pure lands where beings of pure karmas are tamed. And then the Nirmanakaya appears for ordinary sentient beings in the 6 realms of samsara, in all the 6 realms. So those who tame and those to be tamed are both Nirmanakayas. Anyone who possesses Buddha nature really is Nirmanakaya, a Buddha emanation. But sentient beings, even though they are Nirmanakayas, they possess Buddha nature temporarily due to their karma. They experience the actual sufferings of hell as hungry spirits, animals, and so on. Until they have purified those stains of ignorance, they will continue to go through these miserable states of existence. There's also this prayer where we say, may I liberate those not liberated, may I release those not released. And that is, it's for the purpose of that. Liberating and releasing means to purify these stains. And so what is it that liberates them or releases them? It's the Buddha, but what is Buddha? The Buddha is a mind of immeasurable love and compassion and wisdom. there is love and there is the wisdom of emptiness that realizes that self and other do not exist separately. But even though the Buddhas have realized that, there are still those sentient beings who have not realized that, who do perceive a duality. And until they have realized that there is no duality, the Buddhas will continue to manifest as nirmanakayas and so on to benefit sentient beings in any way, in every way. It is said that whatever is done in the field of knowable things is done by Buddha. So this is how you see it if you really understand what Buddha is. Then you will not just see the Buddha as just a person, but the Buddha is, the essence of a Buddha is wisdom and compassion. Jigten Sumgön had said in the Gongchik, so that quote is from the Gongchik, everything that's done in the field of knowable things in this world is done by Buddha. And he also said, cause and effect is the natural manifestation of one's moment-to-moment thoughts. If you really reflect on these quotes again and again, you will be able to really see what is meant. So that is the essence of the wheel of the two accumulations of merit and wisdom. As a result of having perfected these, the Buddhas appear as a Dharmakaya, pervading, which is like space, and from that then appear the rainbow like Sambhogakayas and the Pure Lands, and then also the Nirmanakayas appearing in the 6 realms of samsara. Those to be tamed and those who tame exist together, and they're all Nirmanakayas. There's one Jikung text by Rinzin Chudong speaking about the 4 chakras or the 4 wheels, and the emanation wheel or chakra is related to the emanation body or form, which is the Nirmanakaya. So from the emanation wheel or chakra, through this turning of the emanation wheel, the Buddhas appear in the particular forms of the sentient beings in the 6 realms of samsara. So in brief, all of these quotes here, they relate to each other. For example, there is another one that says, in a text it says, so all those who, may all males become Chenrezig and may all females become Tara. So what it means is that any male with compassion really is Chenrezig, and any female with compassion really is Tara. So that's also explained in the sadhana on the third practice. So anything that's done that benefits beings, anyone who does anything to benefit beings, in my view, really is a Nirmanakaya, a Buddha manifestation. So when we speak about all females, for example, become Tara, what that means is not that they all begin to appear like with Tara's ornaments and the flowers and the body color and so on, but it's Tara's essence, which is love and compassion. And all those who have love and compassion really are a manifestation of Tara. So it is the union of emptiness and compassion, the space-like nature of emptiness, and the skillful means of great compassion, or the wisdom of emptiness and the skillful means of great compassion. The skillful means of great compassion is the warmth that melts the ice block of self-grasping. And once it has melted, then through wisdom one recognizes the empty essence of mind itself, which is there is no duality between self and other. And so that is related to this quote by on the 4 chakras. This unceasing wheel of emanation manifests for as long as there are sentient beings, but inseparable from them. So this quote, and also saying, as Jigten Sumgön said, everything that's done in the field of noble things is done by Buddha. These quotes really have the same meaning if you really know how to think about them properly. So it means that in the 6 realms of samsara, we all have the same nature. There is pure and impure Nirmanakayas, but they all are Nirmanakayas. And then all those among these beings who possess great love and compassion and act to benefit others, really, in my view, are really Buddha emanations. For example, I really see all scientists as Buddha emanations, Nirmanakayas, because scientists, they create things that bring temporary well-being to beings, for those who temporarily are distracted by this life. Now the scientists create airplanes and cars and roads and so forth. But it's still done by the same intelligence. There's just a difference in the level of wisdom or intelligence. So this is how we need to understand this quality of wisdom or intelligence. And so the difference in Buddhism then comes about how we utilize this intelligence, this wisdom. And that is related to taking refuge and the motivation of bodhicitta. That is what makes the difference. This is how we utilize intelligence, in a more transcendent way. And it is the refuge combined with bodhicitta. So the refuge that has bodhicitta as its motivation for taking refuge. So this is how I see it. And when you see it in this way, then you really know how to view the mind. So then there are some who don't know how to view their mind, and even though they might understand, maybe they can speak about it, they know it's all about ignorance and so on, and they understand all of this, they're Buddhist practitioners. However, they do not actually look at their own mind, and because they don't really look at their own mind, they always consider themselves as most important. For example, they think I need to have an advantage and so forth. So they will continue to temporarily wander in samsara. But however, even though they are still in samsara, they will gain some temporary benefits from their understanding and their practice, albeit selfish. But as a result, still they will, for example, temporarily find birth as human beings and experience perfect wealth and so on. And it's just in order to attain the ultimate state of enlightenment, one needs this wheel of the two accumulations, which is the refuge that is based on a motivation of bodhicitta. So we cannot separate them, the refuge, from the bodhicitta. And if we know how to take refuge with bodhicitta properly, in my view, really anyone that does anything in this world to benefit and bring happiness to others is really done by Buddha. For example, the airplanes or the even natural elements like the clouds and the rain falling down from the sky, anything that benefits beings really is an enlightened activity of the Buddhas. And so, as you mentioned before, in the branch of confession, just temporarily, because beings are confused and controlled by their thoughts of attachment and aversion, they do not recognize it as such. But if you recognize it, then actually, as our Drikung Master Dhammaraja had said, then you recognize that everything that appears and exists is the divine form of the deity. So if you understand this point, this is how you will begin to see all appearance and existence. So what we need to understand here also with this unceasing wheel of the two accumulations is that the Buddhas, the Nirmanakayas, they act for the benefit of sentient beings unceasingly throughout the 6 periods of day and night. And so where is this Buddha? Who is doing these activities? It's anyone in this world who brings about the benefit and happiness of others. So again, what we need to understand to be a Buddha is a mind of wisdom and compassion.
내가 되는 고마운 일이 있을지 당연히 또 로데 연합 되게 편지 선바도 찌와들 남지 그런도 내가 되게 기시양 공연
那么在这边这个忏悔之呢，主要就是要我们净化我们嗔心的这个烦恼。当我们烦恼升起的时候，马上了知，然后再放下，这个就是所谓的忏悔。那接下来呢是这个随喜之三世诸佛以及诸圣众二资无尽不断之转轮，一切众生所具一切善，具足欢喜心而随喜之。那么在这边呢，我们这个这是主要是对治我们自己的内在的嫉妒心的，它的字义已经很明了了。这边所谓的二资粮呢，主要就是智慧跟福德资粮。那福德资粮是就是我们自己的慈爱心，那个这个，所以呢，这个慈爱心是三世诸佛无尽不间断的慈爱的众生。这样的比喻，然后过去佛陀也曾经讲说，不要去只说我的身体或者是我的语言，只要是因为这些呢是你没有办法永远支持保持的。那但是只要知道真的要见我的话，只要直视你自己的自心就可以了。那弥勒日巴祖师讲到六度波罗蜜的时候，在讲到说，在你之外没有其他的这个佛了，指的就是说佛就是你心性的这个本质。佛是被空悲双运的，众生其实也都有这个佛性呢，只是众生本为佛，只为客尘遮。为什么是客尘？怎么遮呢？主要就是我们对二元对立这个执着而出现的这个轮回。那么宝性论上面也有讲，我们了解了心性之后，再没有可以净化的东西，也没有再可以证得的这个东西了。它就是佛性，就是自然圆满无瑕的佛性无瑕，那么无所染污。在这个大圆满的这个追击三要里面，那个当我们了知这个明白这个它的这个本质呢，本源就是具足在那里，它这个不是这种了知，并不是新的，因为主要是来自于我们这个明觉明性的这种本质。我们了知唯一的这个本质是如何做呢？就是要回归到我们自己的自心。那我们能够这样子理解，透过经验之后有信心，那就可以得到念头的这个解脱。那这一点当然是比较困难的，要解脱我们自己的念头是不容易的。那我们我们知道说，烦恼的升起呢，它是会这个累积这个业力的。那么我们应该要用慈爱心来净化我们自己的业力，并且能够利益这个长养我们自己的利他心。如果我能够不离开利他心的话，这能够继续累积，时时刻刻继续累积二资粮。这个法身呢是好像虚空一样，报身是好像天空中的这个彩虹。那么这个是纯净的这个佛所在的这个净土，也是这个报身的显现。那化身就是一切的化现，但是我们在一切化现的外相呢，我们也知道它根本是具足佛性的。那么如果说有这样理解，那为什么这个凡夫是这样子的在轮回在受苦呢？因为凡夫除了佛性之外，还有他们的业力，而感受到经验到暂时的这个苦。那么我们应该要做的就是要去净化我们自己的这个无明。那么我们过去曾经讲到一些祈愿文，就是解脱那些未解脱者，解放那些未解放者。那这边所谓的这个解放解脱呢，主要就是我们的这个佛，因为他们有无量的个慈心以及对空性究竟的了解。那所谓相对应的众生就是二元对立，执二元对立为实的。那么我们要知道，直到这个众生能够解脱，要证悟这个智慧的时候，自然就没有二元对立的。 在那个之前，在众生真正究竟解脱之前，佛就继续展现出报化身来利益众生。那么这个因为佛陀的本身就是悲智双运的，在吉田颂公祖师讲的共其正法一义里面才讲到这世界的一切的利益之源就是佛，那么因果乃为刹那心自行，就是刹那刹间心绪的这个成熟的展现就是因果。如果我们好好思维的话，就可以知道这两个句话的这个意思。我们知道佛陀具足三身，就是像虚空一样的法身，像净土一样的报身，以及是六道需要被这个降服的这个众生这个化身。那在这个我们子贡传承上的那个Rinchen Church 他讲到说是化身的转轮就这个跟化身是有彼此紧密的关系的。那因为我们能够要利益众生的化现出种种六道轮回的种种这个身形来利益这些所有的这个众生。我们要知道这些这个成就者的这个法语彼此是相关的。那我们也曾经讲过，愿我视一切男众为观音，女众为度母。那我们知道就是有一切具有悲心的男众就是观音，具有悲心的女众就是度母。这个是在断法或者是施身法的这个法本里面有提到的。我们要知道一切利他众生的就是化身。那么我们把女众看成就是度母，这因为我们这样讲并不是说它的外相就转化成度母，而是它内在的慈爱心的这个本质，慈悲心的这个本质，它本身是空悲双运的。那个所谓的空就是如空的这个本性本质，这个是一种空性。那么悲心就是所谓的方便法，所以有的这个智慧跟这个方便结合在一起呢，这个就是佛菩萨的特质。那这个悲心呢，也就是方便法，这个悲心呢，就是可以帮我们凝固成冰块的这个心性可以融化的这个来源。我们要知道这个心性的这个本质是无二的，那这个就是心的这个本质。所有的这个化身也分成纯净的化身跟不净的化身，主要的就是对于那些有大慈爱慈悲心的人利他者，我们都可以把它看成是佛陀的这个化身。因为就我个人的观点来讲，在这个世界上呢，这个社会上呢，所谓的科学家也是化身，因为他们都是所做的很多的研究来利益众生，包括像车子啊飞机等等。除了有世间智之外，也有这个出世间智。所谓什么叫做智慧呢？就是我们有着内在的菩提心，然后我们想要发心皈依三宝等等。那么所以这个我们想要发心皈依，主要就是来自我们内在的这个菩提心。那这个是我的见地，我所看到的。我了知道，当我们见到一个人，见到他的这个心性呢，的差别。众生虽然在理论上了解了，那为什么还不去真正的去看自心呢？那因为这样子没有往内去看，当烦恼升起的时候，没有去看他的自心，没有去看这些烦恼，就自然就没有办法解脱。那么这个就继续执着，而到六道受生，而变成一个自私的一个众生了。所以我们要得到这个究竟的这个证悟，主要就是需要这个靠这个二资粮、福德资粮跟智慧资粮的累积。所以我们从皈依发菩提心开始，如果知道说我们二者是如何同时修持，我们可以如何同时修持皈依以及菩提心，那么这个是能够自利利他的。 这个也是佛陀的这个行止，就像是空中的云，那化现出这个雨来利众一般。那飞机科学家造出飞机来利益众生的这个运输也好，旅行也好，这都是佛陀证悟本质的这个事业的这种展现，也就是悲智双运跟本质上的一种事业的这个转现。那一般的众生，我们被执着二元对立，要不然就是贪执我们所喜爱的东西，或者是排拒我们自己所不喜爱的人事物等等。但是在这个我们直供噶举的 Dhamma-raja 他讲说我们要知道外相存在的本质就是本尊的这个化现。我们要知道佛陀的化现是利众的，他是日夜60不间断的这个自利利他的。那么所谓的化身就是为了利益众生带来快乐。那么他本质上的他的内心是空悲双运的人，这就是所谓的佛，就是证悟的人。那他们是会有这种特质的。
So it says here, I rejoice in all the virtues, so of all the sentient beings, without exception. So, of course, now if as a Buddhist practitioner, in order to attain state of enlightenment, the state of those noble ones, the victorious ones, we need the two accumulations. But even in a temporary sense, within samsara, one needs merit. For example, you can see a difference in merit in the animal realm, for example. There are some animals who care for one another with great love and great kindness. And actually, that also is the result of the virtue of rejoicing, having rejoiced in the virtue of others. If you rejoice, then your own love will increase. And then this love is dedicated for others through rejoicing. So people have different levels of obscuration. Some have more heavy, thick layers of obscuration. So for example, even though they're human beings, there is some people who are so obscured that they even kill their loved ones, like their husband and wife and friends and so on. And then in the animal realm, you have animals who are much better than that, much less obscure, because they help each other, they protect each other. One animal protects other animals. For example, I've seen it on TV. For example, how there was a flooding, and there was this dog mother whose puppies all were kind of flushed away by the flooding, the water, and then the dog mother, went in there to pick out each and every one of the little puppies, to protect them all. And this is really actually also activity of the Buddha to show that, for scientists to show us that, because by seeing that, it really helps us a lot to increase our own love. And that is what is meant with everything that's done in the field of knowable things is done by Buddha. When we see something like this, for example, we understand, we can see the quality of love, and we rejoice in that. And when you rejoice in that, your own love increases even more. So rejoicing is extremely important. So those who understand that will cultivate immeasurable joy when seeing the virtue of others, and that increases their own love. So for that, actually, it's really very beneficial to watch TV. Sometimes on TV you see these animal shows, for example, that show how animals care for each other, and often they care for each other with much greater kindness than many humans actually do. And so that's why the Buddha had said, as he mentioned before, do not grasp at my body, do not grasp at my speech. There's nothing to hold on to. It is the mind that you need to find. For example, like disregarding body and speech, no, look at the mind, look at an animal's mind. Without looking at body and speech, the animal's mind who cares for others with great love, that is really the love of a Buddha, the love and the compassion. The body can manifest in many uncertain ways, in many different ways. So don't follow the body or the sound, or like the speech and so on. But look, Buddha said, if you can't see me this way. You can only see me if you look at the mind, my mind. And the mind of a Buddha is a mind of love. And whoever possesses love is really an emanation of a Buddha. So this is how you should understand it. And so for today, we stop the teachings here on the topic of rejoicing. Remember, it's so beneficial to rejoice in the virtues of others, whatever virtue it is, in samsara and nirvana. It is said that if you rejoice in that, you will obtain the results that merit together with the one who is accumulating it. And if you rejoice in the great merit of the Buddhas, then we will gain that merit together with all the Buddhas. So that's why it's so important. And this is also how, for example, the Buddha Amitabha had created the Pure Land of Devachan just effortlessly. It comes from this quality of merging the merit through rejoicing, one's own merit, merging one's own merit through rejoicing with the merit of the Buddhas. Then things will just be accomplished spontaneously, naturally. And so regarding rejoicing, of course, the great scholars can speak very elaborately, but this is just the essence of it. It's very important. And again, what is it? Why do we rejoice? Because rejoicing is an antidote to jealousy. And whenever jealousy arises in the mind, that's actually your true enemy. Because jealousy really destroys all good qualities. So therefore, reflect on that, understand the faults of jealousy and the good qualities, the importance of rejoicing. And then when you kind of compare them, you will come to the conclusion of that it would be better if I would rejoice, actually. So that's why rejoicing is extremely important, Dharma friends, and Tashi Delek.
那么在这边讲到这个三世诸佛以及诸圣众二资无尽不断之转轮，一切众生所具一切善，具足欢喜心而随喜之。这个是我们要做的是随喜一切众，没有一个例外，任何的例外。那么佛德佛身正悟呢，一切的在都需要这个福德跟智慧的这个资粮，大家都需要这两种资粮的这个累积。即使是堕在这个傍生道的畜生道的动物也是一样，彼此之间也有一些这个动物之间有很多的这个善业的，他们能够彼此照顾，所以我们的这些都是来自于他们过去世的发的随喜心。如果我们能够我们常常修习随喜的话，我们自己的慈爱心也能够增长。那么众生有各种种不同的烦恼，那么无明是深重的，甚至嗔心那么强烈到杀了自己的家人都有。但是这个也有一些畜生道的众生呢，他们的慈爱心比人是还很多的。那么我们也看过有水灾的时候，可能小狗狗的被冲走的，那狗妈妈就内外的奔跑，想要去求助。那么这些就是因为他们的这个慈爱心，一切所做都是佛陀的这个慈爱心。我们随行的话，这可以进一步的来有这个增长我们的这个慈爱心的修持。那所以从这一点来讲，我们看电视也有它的好处，因为我们可以知道学习到动物之间如何彼此来做这个照顾，都如何彰显他们这个慈爱心。所以呢，过去佛陀曾经讲说，不要去执着我的身体，不要去执着我的语言语事。那么这个要去看我的这个慈爱心。 那么那个彼此的相互慈爱心的这个支持，这个就是佛陀的这个大爱心大爱。他要提醒我们不要去追逐外相或者是他的音声，但可以以那个慈爱心来见我。那今天我们所讲的就到此为止。我这个讲到随喜，这所讲的是非常有这个能够随时修随喜，这是非常有利益的事情。那么不管是在轮回或涅槃能同得其善果，如果能够随喜佛陀这个善行，那当然更好，他就到最后能够证到不费力自然与佛等同的一切这个状况的一切任运的这个成就。那么为什么我们要随喜呢？当我们我们的这个烦恼升起的时候呢，我们或嗔心升起的时候，我们会摧毁的一切。那与其让这样子的接受后来的这个痛苦的结果，不如我们就是去随喜。那这一点是很重要的。谢谢各位，是祝大家长寿吉祥。那明天也是同样的时间，明天也是加州西岸的美国西岸加州的早上9点钟到中午12点。那在亚洲的话就是半夜12点到早上清晨3点。谢谢各位，祝各位午安晚安。